Mind, I'll make a start. Welcome to the Education Overview and Scrutiny Committee. As you were aware, members, the Chair isn't able to attend today, so if I may, I'll bring Tim James in, our Legal Officer, to confirm the process for appointing a new Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Leanne, and morning, members, officers. Yes, because the usual Chair isn't present, then for the meeting to proceed, I would invite the members who are present to indicate whether they'd like to nominate someone to act as chairperson, and to see if that nomination is seconded. So, are there any nominations for anyone to act as chair?
I'd like to nominate Councillor Jess Powell, please, Chair.
I'll second that.
Thank you, members. Are there any other nominations at all? That being the case, can I ask members, is there consensus that Councillor Powell should act as a chairperson? Is that generally accepted amongst the committee? Thank you. Anyone?
Yes.
Thank you, members. Thank you. Well, Councillor Powell, are you happy to act as the chairperson for the purposes of this meeting, please?
Yeah, that's fine. I'll read out our usual briefing then before we start.
Thank you, members.
So may I welcome all members and officers to the meeting of the Education Overview and Scrutiny Committee. On behalf of the committee, may I also give a special welcome and many thanks to our new members, Victoria Haller and Michelle Jones, who are our new co-opted Parent Governor representatives, and Councillors Burnett and Councillor Killock even. Just to remind members, this meeting is able to be viewed live by members of the public and press today. Therefore, may I welcome anyone that may be watching. A recording of this meeting will be made available on the Council's YouTube channel after the meeting has concluded, should anybody wish to view it. Just to confirm, as a Council, we welcome the use of the Welsh language within our public meetings, but I can confirm that I have not received any notification or requests to use Welsh today. Therefore, this meeting will be conducted in English only. As a reminder, may I ask members to refrain from using the chat facility and instead use the raised hand icon to indicate when you want to speak. Please, could you also keep your microphone muted when not talking so there are no interruptions. So moving on to the agenda, could I ask Geraint to confirm if we have received any apologies?
Thank you, Chair. The only apologies I'm aware of is from Councillor Rose Seaborn.
Chair, Councillor Ron Burnett sends his apologies.
Oh, thank you. Okay. Okay, then item 2 is declarations of interest. Could I ask members to state whether they have any declarations of interest? I think we're going alphabetical order, so if Councillor Burnett's not here, Councillor Karen.
No, I have nothing. Okay.
Councillor Evans?
No.
Councillor Jones?
No.
Councillor Killock?
No.
Councillor Overton?
No.
Myself, no. Councillor Thomas? Councillor Thomas, was it on mute, I think?
Sorry, no declarations, thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And Victoria Haller?
No.
Thank you. And Michelle Jones?
No.
Thank you. Okay, then we move on to item 3, which is the minutes from the previous meeting. So this was held on the 3rd of February. Just to remind members, these minutes related to the report we received from the EAS on how the business plan is supporting schools to improve and ensure that all pupils reach their full potential across Torfaen, especially with regards to the move towards blended learning. Can I ask members to confirm that the minutes are an accurate account of the meeting? If anybody is against or wishes to abstain, could you confirm now, please? No? Okay then. There's a bit of a tense moment. Okay. We'll move on to item 4, they confirm, so action sheet. Please could members confirm if they have any questions and are they happy with the action sheet? So are there any questions or comments about that one? No? Okay then. if we're happy to confirm that when we move on to item 5, which is update on the recommendations report. I'm going to invite Leanne to go through the report for us.
Okay, thank you, Chair. As I stated yesterday, members, you will recall that the following two items, items 5 and 6 on the agenda, are standard reports that we try and take every year for you to agree and make recommendations where appropriate. Obviously, we've hardly had any meetings this year due to the pandemic, so it's imperative really that you as a committee review progress on these recommendations and make sure that you're satisfied with the outcome. Please note, members, that within your appendix, the last item you scrutinised in Feb in relation to the AS business plan. I didn't include that because I feel it's too early at this stage to determine the impacts at the moment. So I've left that out, but obviously that will feed into the report you receive next year. The scrutiny activity on this report really is for you to determine whether appropriate progress has been made on the recommendations that you previously put forward. Are there any questions?
Okay, if there's no question, oh, Michelle, you have a question?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Obviously, it's been a very challenging year for colleagues in education and schools. So my question relates to how can we demonstrate impact with very little evidence, because business as usual activities haven't been ongoing.
Chair, would you like me to come in there to answer that? Sorry.
Yeah, that'd be brilliant. Thanks, Dermot.
I think Michelle's asked the question that every local authority officer in Wales is trying to answer. So thanks, Michelle. I'll have to ask Blaenau Gwent for their response to this afterwards. With difficulty is the honest answer. Clearly, we've been focusing in on, excuse me, looking at the impact of blended learning at the moment. So across the region, and I think this was covered in the last session that the AS came to, there's a celebrate, share, support, and refine process in place, which is looking at how well we've done and how schools have individually tackled their own response to blended learning. That learning is coming together and being collated, and we're looking at what the best practice model for blended learning is going forward. I think that's a really important piece of work, because there is no national model for blended learning, of course, and that's something we're all we've had to do as the public health crisis evolved. I think that'll give us a really good launch point. Hopefully we won't need it, but if we do need to go back into school closures, etc., we've got some good understanding there of what is effective practice. And clearly schools are now getting ready, looking forward to their SDPs, so the school development plans in the coming term. And one of the key pieces of work that we'll be doing over the coming term is working with individual schools, looking at all the data we do have, because although members, as you're aware, we can't present collated data, and it's highly likely in the, I was going to say in the exams, but in the centre determined grades, when those are released, we won't necessarily be reporting those as we may have done over the last 2 or 3 years. But we do have a very rich picture of how performance in school across a range of different areas is still going ahead. We'll be having individual discussions with those schools, looking to see how they've used that data to inform how well they know themselves, what their key priorities are for the coming year, their local targets, and we'll be coming back with a view around how effective the school development plans are going forward. So for us, I think, and maybe in this committee, one of the key points of discussion over the year ahead will be about how impactful school development plans are, and that work is underway at the moment. So I hope that gives a feeling for where we're going next.
Thanks, Dermot. Any other questions, members? Okay, if not, then are we happy to remove those items, or should any of them remain on the committee's annual monitor? Okay, I think we're happy then to go ahead. So if we move on to item 6, which is the update on the externally adopted action plans, again, I'll ask Leanne to go through the report for us.
Okay, thank you. I don't want to spend much time on this, members, because I appreciate the main reason for your meeting today is on ALN. But as the chair rightly pointed out, this report provides members with an update on progress made towards recommendations that's been made by our external auditors, WAO and Estin. There's 3 reports mainly. The first one from WAO is on the wellbeing offer. The second one is a WAO report again in relation to achieving improvement in support to schools through the Regional Education Consortia and Early View. And the last report is the Estin inspection and monitoring visits for October 2011-2013. The main activity for the committee to confirm today is whether they are satisfied with the progress and whether they wish to retain this item on the monitor going forward. Obviously, the last 2 reports, the Estin inspection and the WAO's report on achieving improvement through the Regional Education Consortia, is slightly out of date now. I don't know how you feel about that. I mean, I think it's fair to say, Dermot, probably every local authority is due a Estin inspection, it's imminent. So it may be, you know, other reports will have more importance. So it may be that you want to remove those from your monitor. The wellbeing offer, I think is fair to say a lot of the updates that were provided by the officer on that. I think that piece of work has been hindered due to the pandemic. So you may be minded to retain that on your monitor so that you can see what progress has been made at a later stage. Thank you.
Okay, members, any questions or comments on that one? I think as Leanne says, I'd be happy to leave that one on. Kathy?
Yeah, I think we should keep the wellbeing one, but I think the other one is so out of date now that I don't think we need to keep it on.
Yeah, that's fine. Okay, I think then we're all in agreement. So if we move on then to item 7, which is the main item. So this is on the ALN report. So the purpose of this is to update members on how the local authority is preparing for the Additional Learning Needs Act and the arrangements in place to ensure the local authority fulfils its duties under the new requirements. So may I welcome Sarah Hayes, Head of Pupil Support, and Dermot McChrystal, Chief Officer for Education, to the meeting. Could I ask the officers if they could provide members with a brief overview of the main points within the report for us? Thank you.
Okay, good morning, councillors and LA officers.
Oh, I think you've gone on to mute. Sorry, Sarah.
Sorry, I don't know how I did that. Apologies. So morning, members and LA officers. So you've all had a chance to consider the report and think about any aspects and questions that you want to raise. So I'll go through and just spend a few minutes highlighting the key points. So in putting together this report, the aim was to bring you up to speed with everything the local authority has been doing since the announcement of the new Act took place in 2018. So as you know, the Act came into place in 2018 and the Code of Practice for Additional Learning Needs, and I'll refer to that as ALN, as we go forward. The Code of Practice was approved by Senate on the 23rd of March this year. So what's been happening over the last sort of few years since 2018 is local authorities have been looking at what the changes are needed. An ALN regional lead has been appointed in each region and across Wales, and we were fortunate to host that person. So we have Tracy Peed, who I know has presented to members before.
Sorry, Sarah's gone back onto mute.
Oh, sorry. I don't know what is happening. It's because I got my papers in front of me. Sorry, I'll try not to do that again. Tracy Peed is our ALN regional lead, and we've had a model of regional cluster leads who've been ALNCOs. So when I say ALNCOs, that's the new term for additional learning needs coordinators. So up till January, they were called SENCOs, special educational need coordinators, but the new terminology is for ALNCOs. So when I use that term, I'm referring to those colleagues in school. So since January 21, each school had to have a named designated ALNCO. So our model has been having our transformation lead in Tracy Peed, and she has been sort of setting up that system with the cluster and regional ALNCOs, if that makes sense. And in Appendix 1 of the paper, what I captured for you was, you know, an overview of everything that's been happening, because in writing this paper, what I found challenging was how to cover everything that had been happening as succinctly as possible. And for me, having a visual mind map just captures it all. So as you can see from that appendices, we've got the Welsh Government drivers. We've had, you know, a lead director who's been involved in this. We've then have the SUC regional directors as well, and we have the SUC ALN lead. So all of the aspects of the Act and the code have been sort of cascaded out through those channels. And then there have been 4 key areas that we've been focusing on, which have been early years, schools, post-16, and then the theme that permeates all of it is the collaboration theme. So within all of the work plans, there've been themes and work groups, task groups working on various aspects. So for example, Torvine has led on looking at IDPs and the format of those and the shape of those, and basically we've come up with some templates that we've piloted, and we've also been working very closely with Kafili on an online package around IDPs that makes everything so much more simple for class teachers, because the whole thrust of the code is that it's, you know, the ethos and philosophy behind it is that ALN is everybody's business. It's not just the ALNCO in a school where children are pulled out for group activities once a week and they deal with everything. The idea is that it's part of the curriculum, and we have our new curriculum coming in 2022, that it's embedded in what every teacher is doing in terms of the teaching and learning in the classroom. So it's really moving away from that model of children, you know, having teaching assistants taking them off to do things. The thrust is that it's happening in the classroom as part of the curriculum. So the collaboration and working closely with health and social care has been key. There have been various pilots we've been doing. Again, we've been really fortunate that people have been so committed in our authority that they've really wanted to be part of these pilots. And so one of the pilots was around a health around the cluster initiative. So that's where colleagues, physiotherapists, speech therapists, occupational therapists, art therapists have all been involved around the table to work with SENCOs where they want to talk about children over whom they have concerns. And they've been coming up with a problem-solving approach and giving sort of suggested strategies and ideas for people to use. So what that's enabled is for each organisation, each profession, so those in education and health, to really understand each other's roles. And rather than children being on a lengthy waiting list to have occupational therapy or physiotherapy, the ALNCOs have been able to leave those cluster meetings with an action plan of strategies, resources that they can use. Again, you know, thinking about what we've gone through with the pandemic, people have made huge maximised opportunities for online learning. So at the times when the teachers were on a rota basis to be in schools, what they were doing in their time when they were working at home, preparing materials, were looking at online training. Again, health colleagues have produced loads of resources and materials for people to see online to develop their skills and knowledge. So, you know, we've used the pandemic and all of the difficulties that that's presented us with as a real opportunity for people to engage in training, because that's been so difficult for staff to be released to do that ordinarily. So again, it's sort of, thinking of those 4 themes that I shared earlier and looking at how within each of those areas schools have been developing their plans, their school development plans, to think about the new curriculum and how to meet the needs of every child in their classroom, including those with ALN. The collaboration, that's also included colleagues in the youth forum. We've talked about health, social care colleagues as well are key in that. And then we have the SNAP organisation, which is our parent carer forum. And then we've been working with health. They have a process called Putting Things Right. So again, it's been working with them. That's their complaints procedure, really, for a better word. So again, it's just sort of really trying to think how we get things right for children and families so they don't need to be putting in complaints and getting into adversarial situations. So a readiness survey took place in March 19 and again in March 20. And that's basically showed us that we felt confident that schools and colleagues in the local authority have been as ready as they possibly can be. What we've done since then, because we wanted to follow that up because we didn't feel we could just assume, because we'd done a snapshot in March, that was accurate, because things have changed. As I say, people have done lots of learning during the pandemic, and the needs of children, because of what's happened with children having gaps, not being in school, we've had to kind of rethink things and go back to the basics. So we felt it'd be useful to put out another questionnaire to our ALNCOs to really get clarity on where they feel they're at. How confident are they with the new code in understanding what they're doing? So as a result of that, we've got a really clear picture in Torvine of where our ALNCOs are feeling they're at and what they feel they need. So as a result of that, what we've done is set up 4 task and finish groups, which will involve stakeholders. And the themes are looking at the implementation and the timelines, the processes and procedures, looking at individual development plans and the formats of those, looking at, what parents need and guidance for them, and looking at what children and young people need and guidance for them. So in each of those work groups, the parent one, obviously there'll be parents involved in that, and the pupil one, there'll be pupils. And we're really maximising on using things like YouTube videos, because young people, that's the first place they go if they want to find anything out. So it's really trying to look at where they're at and what they need. So those task groups are just in the process of setting them up, getting the membership, and that's what we're looking at taking us forward over the next few weeks and into the autumn term. The challenge we have currently is that we are waiting for the implementation guidance from Welsh Government. We still do not have that, and we still do not have a date for that. So we have training planned, further training. There has been training throughout the last few years, but further training, because we had the final version of the code in March, so it's based on that. And we are needing to do that in the next few weeks before the end of the summer term. So we have a session planned with head teachers, a session planned with governors, and a session planned with all ALNCOs. And that's to go through again the code as we know it from the March final edition. And it will be giving them the key aspects of implementation as far as we are able to. At the time when we've set those dates for the training, it's going to be about giving them the information that we have at the time. And what we're envisaging as local authority officers, when schools shut in July, that we will be able to carry on doing work over from when term ends on the 20th of July through the rest of July and into August in preparation for September, in the hope that we have the final implementation guidance at that point. So what we're aiming to do is just stick with the facts, stick with what we know, provide people with clarity on what we know. And, the aim is that the code starts to be implemented in September, but we do have a 3-year timescale to fully implement it. So with aspects of post-16 and early years, we don't have to have those firmly in place till 2022. So, that's our plan. So in conclusion, in terms of our readiness, my feeling based on the work we've done, based on that latest questionnaire we've done, which we also want to run with head teachers as well, I feel confident that we're as ready as we can possibly be, given where we are with the final implementation guidance from Welsh Government. Okay, so I'll end that there. So are there any questions people would like to raise for me?
Okay, fab. So members, we've got a question sheet. So are we happy to go through them sort of in order that they're in there? Okay.
Chair, would it just be easier for you to call on somebody to ask the next question?
Yeah, that's fine. Okay. Well, the first one I think has been answered. So that was just how confident we are. So obviously that was, you know, kind of the purpose of that little update. So question 2, if I ask Councillor Jones to ask it.
Thank you, Chair. In key issues on section top of page 2 of the report, you confirm that demand on specialist places continues to be greater than the number of specialist places that we have available, and that structured conversations are taking place on what can be offered in the future. How will you ensure that this demand is met going forward?
Okay, so there's a number of elements to that. So what we've done is been reviewing our current specialist provision. So we have plans in place to extend Crownbridge School by 50 places. So that will give us some more capacity. We also have all our resource spaces. So those structured conversations I'm referring to are looking at the needs those resource spaces are meeting. So it's looking at, are there any children in those resource spaces that with a planned approach could be supported back in their mainstream, so that we're ensuring we've got the children with the, you know, with the most complex need in our context, having those places. So that's the kind of purpose of that. It's the whole model of looking at the curriculum, look at individual learning needs and supporting children in their mainstream schools, in their mainstream classes, so that, as I say, the ones with the most complex language and communication needs, social interaction needs, have those resource-based places. So that's the purpose of the structured conversation. And some of this is just about changing the way we've worked previously, and that, you know, with we've got some new staff in some of our resource bases. So with the new curriculum, the new code, it gives us an opportunity to rethink things. So that's what's that about. The issue with whenever we build, this is the same in every authority, whenever we build more specialist places, we can guarantee we'll fill them. And we also have huge demand on Crownbridge from our neighbouring authorities. We end up in tribunals where children in other authorities are wanting those places, and if tribunal find in favour of the parents, we do not have any choice. They are placed in our provision. So that's a constant challenge where we're working on that and giving clear, robust evidence to say, you know, our school is actually full. We can't go over numbers, but that is a constant challenge. So as I say, it's about working with the mainstream schools, ensuring that they can meet the needs of children as far as possible through this individualised learning plan, looking at our resource spaces and just seeing if, you know, if we can, in some cases where we have some funding, extend those places. And it's just looking at the whole picture in that sense. Dermot, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
No, I think that was a really comprehensive response. I think members, you'll also be aware that we've looked at in the past how we fund mainstream places. And it used to be a system whereby schools would apply to the local authority and officers would try to involve schools in making decisions, whereas we've moved to a position now where schools actually work together and we join them to look at how those places, so how those funding packages may be provided, and schools actually moderate that themselves. So I think that, in conjunction with the reviews that Sarah has talked about, give us a position where there's ownership across the system, and with schools working with the local authority, trying to make the best possible decisions about how we support learners, about which placements we need. And as you'll appreciate, members, this is an ongoing process as needs change, as more children with more complex needs come through. we're in a continuous process of evaluating and planning for how we actually change the provision map that we have in place. So each year you'll see slight changes as we go along. Sarah's mentioned the big investment in Crown Bridge that we hope to achieve over the next couple of years. And we're already thinking about what the next phase of development might be, particularly around some of those high demand areas like autism and support for behaviour, for example. So we're already in discussion with partners around how we might be able to take some of that work forward too.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Dermot and Sarah.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we've got a bunch of questions now which don't have any names attached. So I'm just going to go alphabetically, just so everyone knows what I'm doing, yeah? Okay, so I'm going to ask Councillor Karen to ask the next question, please.
No, he did that to make sure I hadn't fallen asleep, didn't you, Jess? In 3.6, you stated that 3 new statutory roles were required to be out into place by January 2021. I mean, that's the DECLO, the early years additional learning needs, and the Elenco roles. Have all these positions now been filled?
Yes, they have. So every school has a named, as we were saying earlier, additional learning needs coordinator from January. So that's a change from the SENCO role. There are cases where colleagues are retiring. So we have one colleague in one school who's retiring. So there will be a new ALNCO. And what we've been very clear about is looking at ALNCO induction and mentoring, because that is so important for anybody new coming into the role. So as soon as we know who that person is, as yet we haven't been informed, but as soon as we know who that is, we will start this process over the next few weeks. We also, just to add very quickly, we've set up regular sessions with ALNCOs, which we call an ALNCO forum. So we negotiated with the head teachers the timing of this, because obviously with schools returning, it's changed. So we've made that like an hour-and-a-half slot, and we've made those more frequent. So they're sort of little and often. And we have a comprehensive programme at each of those ALNCO forums of working on various themes to support ALNCOs to be ready, basically, for what's happening in September. So that also helps with for anybody new. There's those ALNCO forums that are set up, which is you know, we've worked a system, because there's like 35 of them, of having some input to everybody and then getting them into workshop groups via Teams, and that's worked really, really well. So that ties in with the, you know, people being in place, the induction, and then the follow-up support. And they have named, each school has named a named link educational psychologist and a named ALN link officer. So they've got their go-to people, and certainly myself and others have always been very committed to schools having named people. I don't think it works having a model where they just go to anybody and whoever picks up the phone. I really not happy with that approach at all. So that's really, really key in all of this. They've got their go-to people who they get to understand the school, the system, the issues, what's happening for that school, because all of our schools are very, very different and have very different needs, different demographics. So that's, you know, I think that's credit to all the staff. That's worked really, really well.
You've covered quite well the ALNCO, but what about the designated educational clinical lead officer and the early years additional learning needs leader? How do they coordinate into this system?
Okay, so the DECLO is the designated clinical lead officer. So we have one of those for the whole region. So that person is Dave Williams. He's a consultant psychiatrist. So he has a key meeting called the Gwent Consortium meeting that he chairs and leads. So representatives from each local authority attend that, and that's the forum for us to work on particular aspects. There's a whole health work plan going on behind that. So he's our go-to person, but there is one of them for the whole region, if that makes sense. And that is a health funded post. It's not funded by education. So whereas the ALNCOs are the leads in each of our school, there's one of him and he's funded by health. Then the ALN early years lead officer is Charlotte Dickens. She's our early years manager. So, you know, so she's in post, but the activities within that aren't mandatory till the start of September. So what we've been doing since January to now is really working closely within education, within our departments within education, making sure all the pathways, systems and processes in terms of what happens in the early years sector are aligned, because the early years sector is absolutely huge. So we've got all of the childminders, all of the nursery providers, whether they're maintained or non-maintained. It is absolutely phenomenal, the work that goes into coordinating all of that and making sure all those staff understand what ALN is. And I think one of the things we've all been very, very mindful of, and I'd just like to share it here, is that with the pandemic and with the situation, we basically had all the children that were deemed vulnerable in hubs throughout the pandemic. So those children were having an offer, but there were clearly, because schools were shut, children at home not having an offer, and it's been very variable what those children have had. So whilst we've done our best as an authority to make sure families have had packs of things and had resources, and we've used all our services like the Traveller Ed service and so on to look at our most vulnerable that weren't in school, we have to be mindful that some children have come back into school at a very different level, and are at a very different level from what they would have been had they continued to be in school, because families are all very different. You know, some parents didn't have the confidence to do a lot with their children, or they were working themselves. So it's very, very mixed. So what we've been doing with our schools is supporting them to make sure that when the children have returned, that they've been doing some baseline assessments to look at where the children are at, look at what they need. And that comes back to this individual learning style again, individual learning programme. And what they found, what a lot of our schools have found, that there's been a lot of anxiety, and so the staff have been supporting the children and the parents around their social, emotional, mental health needs as a priority, trying to get them back into the habit and routine and confidence of being ready to learn, because children can't just, you know, if they've got a lot going on, they're anxious, they can't just sit down and learn. So they've had to be focusing on helping the children to be confident and have the behaviours ready to learn, if that makes sense. So, you know, so going back to my point, what we've been really, really keen to support our schools with is we won't then be identifying all of those children that are a little bit delayed with their fine motor skills or their speech and language development as ALN, because the system will be just totally flooded. So that's been key. It's about, you know, them assessing where their children are, looking at designing the curriculum. So for example, where we've got children, say in reception, that are going into year one, they're not going to be at the stage that children going to year one would previously have been, because there's been gaps. So that year one teacher is needing to look at where they're at and what they're going to be taught as a whole class, rather than identifying every child in her class as having ALN, if that makes sense. So that's what we've been really keen to focus on, because, you know, clearly children with ALN, it's those that have significant complex needs that are going to be going on for, you know, the majority of their life, not the children where it's a gap because they haven't been in school. So if that makes any sense at all, that's what we've been kind of just working with schools on. What's the baseline? Where are you at? What are you going to be teaching in your year class? So that's where curriculum is key. And that's why it's been so important for us to work closely with our EAS colleagues. So we have the EAS consortium. They have advisors that go into every school, and that's why it's more important than ever that we're all really joined up in our agendas and what we're doing, because we don't want to.
Most of us are school governors, so we understand baseline assessments and what the EAS does. Okay,
Great.
thank you for that.
Okay, can I ask Councillor Evans to ask question 4, please?
Morning. How will implementation of the requirements be monitored going forward? What processes will you have in place to ensure compliance?
Okay, so schools have their school development plan. We've also done a piece of work with schools on looking at what an inclusive school looks like, and we're thinking that that will form a self-evaluation framework. We're also looking with Tracy Peed at having an accountability framework across the whole, this whole agenda. So all of those aspects will link up. And again, with having, as I said, the named Link EP and the ALN Link Officer, they are working closely with schools in terms of looking at, the IDPs. There's through the ALNCO forum and through our ALN funding group, we have moderation processes as well in looking at how schools are using their funding, looking at IDP. So it's about pulling all of that together. So you've got the SDP, self-evaluation framework, the work that EAS are doing, and then looking, as I say, at an accountability framework that covers everything.
Thank you. And how are you planning on implementing and monitoring progress in settings such as childminders and nurseries?
So, well, that'll be a piece of work that we will support Charlotte Dickens in that early years lead officer role in doing. So it's looking at what they've currently got in place at the minute, what are they doing at the moment, and then what needs to be additional to what those systems and processes are in place.
Thank you.
Okay, if I bring Dermot in a moment.
Thank you, Chair. I think Sarah's point around the SEPs, particularly, I'll come back to childminders in the early year settings in a second, but the SEP is a really important process for us, the school development plan, because one of the things that we've got within the local authority is a wider group meeting where we bring together folks from early years, from schools, local authority staff supporting schools, from finance, etc. And we build up a really rich picture of how schools are functioning, how well they're doing. If they're stuck, we use that session to problem solve how we help them get unstuck. But it also gives us a really good idea of how the ALN systems in their school improvement work are coming together. So we've got a very joined up picture. So when we're looking at monitoring this, we do it at a number of levels. It's not just with ALN, it is within the leadership team within the education service as well. And we take that very, very rounded overview of just how schools are doing. ALN for us is an integral part of school improvement. So as you'd imagine, we look at that as one issue. And it fundamentally is an issue about leadership in schools in terms of how head teachers and governing bodies are ready for this change too. And so we're looking to make sure that we've got support in for heads, for leadership teams, for governors, as well as for staff in classrooms too. In terms of early years, as Sarah said, I think it's been a huge challenge to the sector over this last year. They faced, I think, disproportionate challenges, given the way that many of these settings are funded. Some of the concerns we have are just about sustainability at the moment. And obviously, Sharon and her team are working with the sector very closely to try and support them. So we're very close to the sector in Torvine. We're very dependent on the private providers to actually work with us, and that works really well. Is going really well, and we've got a very close relationship. So, as well as accountability and making sure that things are going well, we've got a raft of work in place to make sure that the professional learning that people need, particularly in early years, is in place. And we've got really effective communication systems in place to support them as well. So I think that's a really important point we just want to make there too. We're here to support colleagues in the early years sector, as well as look at those accountability pathways as well. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, John Killock.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. A lot of the discussion has been around younger children. I'm interested particularly in how this will be monitored in secondary schools, particularly from the point of view of how we will support the ALNCOs. I think there are some very good people, and they are deeply committed people who have been used in the past in some schools to working very much on their own and doing it themselves without a lot of backup, sometimes from other staff in the school. So I'm interested in what kind of sounding board there might be for those ALNCOs, so that if they are struggling with some members of staff not pulling their weight, in what way I'm sure they would do in a primary school, because they have that more all-rounded approach to the child. I'm just wondering what support will be for the ALNCOs so that they're not snowed under and they are getting that relevant support from within the staff of the school.
It's a really good question and a point very well made, and I think it's, you know, the really important point of what you're saying as well is just how important it is for us to recognise that secondary schools are so different from primary schools. It's a totally different system to work within. So in answer to your question, we have those link people that I mentioned to you before. So the psychologist will meet with that person regularly, and the psychologists are trained and skilled to sort of work in a problem solving sort of approach with those colleagues. So where they are struggling, helping to sort of support them in thinking how they take things forward, and in cases where things aren't working well, they will go back to the lead psychologist and myself, and on occasions what we've done where we feel this isn't going as well as we want it to and we want to support them, we've then set up a meeting with the key leadership team in the school to talk to them about, let's just, what's working here, what's not working, what can we do to support. And I think in a lot of cases it is a shift in culture and mindset, and the ACT is, as we were saying at the beginning, the ethos is the ACT is it's everybody's business. It's not down to the ALNCO in a secondary school to do everything. It's every class teacher, every subject teacher is responsibility. So I think it's around the training, is the support in the ALNCO to be confident in the training they're doing with their staff, and we can support them with that. And it is really shifting the culture and the mindset in the school for it to be everybody's business. So we have as I say, the link people going in. We have the ALNCO forum. We have said to ALNCOs that, if they want conversations, any kind of problem solving conversations around things they're struggling with, we are the go-to people to support them. We're there to support them and help them, because it's in everybody's interest that goes really well. So does that answer your question?
In many ways, yes. I'm just wondering whether there is any kind of way in which they can report an issue. I'm just thinking. Back in the day, I was a maths teacher, so I used if it was a head of maths who wasn't doing that. It may be difficult for that ALNCO to complain about that person. So I'm wondering if there is some kind of way in which the ALNCO can, is there going to be a person that ALNCO can go to and say, look, it's going to be very difficult in this school to complain about her, him. What I'm saying.
Yeah.
Sarah, can I come in there? Because I think, John, again, good question. And it's been, an issue over the years where some people haven't maybe felt able to raise issues. So I recognise where you're coming from. Obviously, the responsibility for what happens in schools directly lies with the governing body and the head teacher. And all schools do have whistleblowing policies in place, for example, and have systems for escalating concerns if needs be. So we need to be careful as the local authority that, we support schools in following their own processes. And those are questions that we can pick up in terms of any feedback that we get directly with the school without necessarily going into all of the details. So what I mean is, if we had a concern about how ALN was functioning because someone's given us a message in school, we can raise that through our normal discussions with school in a gentle way to see if there's anything we can do to support. We always encourage people, though, to use the processes that are there in place, because we mustn't step outside of them. That wouldn't be appropriate. But we are confident we've been able to intervene to support schools or individuals in schools where they've felt stuck through the processes that Sarah said, because typically these are people trying to solve problems. Our job is to help them solve that problem, and the processes that we've got in place, I think, are really have been quite effective. So I recognise where the question's coming from, but I think we've probably moved on in terms of the support processes we have in place. And I don't think we're in that situation at the moment. But ultimately, if someone felt that something was inappropriate happening in a school, and I'm mindful of what's in the media this morning about an independent provider, some of the allegations that have been made about that, then there are clear processes in place for people to raise those concerns, and we'd obviously act on those really quickly.
Thank you very much.
Okay, the next question was about accountability framework, which obviously you touched on already. So it's not in place at the moment. Just asking how close are we then to having that in place?
So that's the one that I was mentioning that Tracy Peed is looking on from a regional perspective. So I would imagine that would be ready in the next sort of 4 or 5 weeks, sort of by the end of term, certainly.
Brilliant. Okay. Victoria, are you okay to ask the next question for us?
Yep. One moment. Okay. So how are we planning to work effectively with other agencies and partners to deliver improved outcomes for children and young people?
Okay, so that comes back to when I was talking about the 4 themes at the beginning, the early years, schools, post-16 and collaboration. That's a whole theme in itself. So we have all of the strands of the health Gwent consortium meeting. So that's the one where I said the DECLO, Dave Williams chairs that. That's our forum sort of working with health. We've got the health around the cluster pilot that I mentioned that we've been fortunate to host in Torvine, happening in one cluster in Torvine. And the aim would be, what we'd like to do in Torvine is roll that out across all the clusters. We have the SUC ALN meetings that I go to with the equivalents with all the colleagues in the region. And that's where we also link with EAS, and EAS rep attends those meetings. So that's how we join that up. We also have a statutory officers meeting. So again, we've really maximised on doing things as a region. And what we've heard from when we have any All Wales meetings, what we've had feedback about is that their perception is we're doing so much more in our region as opposed to anywhere else. So I'm really proud to be part of that. I think, you know, it has worked really, really well being part of this regional approach, because we're all trying to achieve the best outcomes for all our children. So what that's meant is with the statutory officers group, you know, one of my colleagues has been leading on the IDP process, as I said earlier, but because, you know, we've got more resource by more people doing things rather than us all doing everything, that's worked really well. So again, that's the statutory officers looking at all the processes, systems, processes, timelines, the statutory processes, and that again, we've been linking very closely with health as part of that. We also work very closely with SNAP. We actually host the contract for SNAP in Torvine, so we lead on that contract. So we've just renewed that for another 3 years, and that's basically, you know, working with that organisation to make sure that we're getting what we need from them and that that's working well with our families. And then we have the regional youth forum that we're working with. And then finally, with our lead psychologist, she's part of a group with other lead psychologists and principal psychologists across the region. So they're doing other work. So, for example, a piece of work that's just come up is NAPEP, which is the National Association for Principal Psychologists, have been looking at the role of EPs in the light of the new code. So that group across the region are looking at what the role, you know, making sure the role of the EP is and we're absolutely making best use of that time. So it's all of those strands, all of those meetings, forums are happening, and I kind of have a role, fortunately, in having a sort of role in each of them. So kind of have the helicopter view really of what's going on in each of those groups. So that would be how, you know, I feel we've got the setup, we've got the models, the systems and processes for engaging with all the sectors to get the best outcomes for children. I think that health cluster is just one of the examples of an initiative that we wouldn't have had we not set up that cluster, and that has had a huge impact on meeting the needs of children and for staff to be more confident and competent in what they're doing, rather than having to wait weeks and weeks and weeks to get access to see any of those health professionals. They've immediately come out of that session and had a clear action plan of, right, I can go back to school tomorrow and I'm going to set that up for that child in that way to develop their fine motor skills or whatever it might be. So I think, you know, working with health has been, you know, very, very positive. And, you know, clearly we're still working through things. You know, as time goes on, we're having, you know, each time we come across things that are a bit tricky, we've got a forum and a place to go to address them. And as the implementation date in September begins, I suspect, you know, there will be other things that come up that we need to deal with, but I feel we've got the setup to address things. We've got a process, we've got a structure, if that makes sense, to be able to deal with things.
Dermot?
Thanks, Chair. Just to add to that, obviously, because we're the lead authority, I manage Tracy Peed, and I'm also the lead for inclusion and ALN in ADU. It means that we can also escalate things on a national setting. And just to re-emphasise what Sarah said, you know, because I get to see hear with Welsh Government colleagues feedback from across the regions, the 4 regions. Sorry, the 5 transformation leads, because there's the 4 regions and then the post-16 transformation lead. I think, you know, Sarah's right. We are well placed in the former Gwent, and I think, you know, lots of the other areas are maybe looking to what we're doing here. That's not to say, as Sarah said, we won't see teething problems. And one of the things we haven't mentioned, because this really came to light after the paper was published, was some of the new issues that have arisen given the commencement orders that Welsh Government published and made us aware of in April. So there are other things that we're working with Welsh Government at the moment, but I absolutely agree with Sarah, we're as best placed as we possibly can be, but we're all waiting to see the operational guidance, because that will give us the real steer of where we go next. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, if I ask Janet then to ask the next question.
Thanks, Chair. School responsibilities. Within the introduction of the report, you state that children's needs are being, sorry, I've got a problem with my IT. Excuse me a minute. Within the introduction of the report, you state that children's needs are being reassessed on their return to school. But the challenges are that, oh gosh, sorry about this, Chair. Sorry.
Do you want me to ask it, Janet, or you?
No, but the challenges are that you won't know the potential age gaps are as a result of COVID. Are you now aware of what these gaps are and how can we address them? Sorry, Chair, about the problems.
So, so we touched on that earlier in terms of wanting schools when the children returned in March, or each time they've returned, to re-establish where they are and what their needs are. And the themes coming out are, you know, the anxiety and the behaviours ready to learn. So that's what schools have been focusing on, is where they're at, really, what they're worried about, because children have got to be feeling emotionally sort of comfortable, resilient, in order to be able to learn. So that's where we're thinking it might be useful actually to do a bit of a snapshot with schools towards the end of term of where they're feeling things are, because we're going by our conversations through our regular meetings with them. So the themes are definitely anxiety. It's definitely around getting those children back into that structure and routine. On a positive note, what schools have just said is that they're just the staff are just so pleased that to be back and to have that, and that the children are back. So I think they've all really loved the children have loved being back with their friends and having that structure again, and have really not enjoyed, a lot of them have not enjoyed being at home the whole time. And parents have found it incredibly difficult to keep their children occupied for the whole day. I think it's been hugely challenging. So I think there's that feeling of, oh, thank goodness, just so pleased to be back in school, have that structure. I think most children have responded well and almost just slotted back into where they were before. Some have been, the anxiety, as I keep saying, is a bit of a theme. So our psychology service has done lots of work around that. We have used the opportunity to do, little YouTube videos and all sorts of things to give schools resources. And there's been so much sent out to schools, or so much that people have done in terms of all these resources. What we've done as an authority is really tried to sift that, because schools have just felt overwhelmed by all of these resources and packs, and everybody jumping on a kind of a opportunity to develop resources. So we've really tried to give schools good packages of what they need, so that they can, to equip staff. How do you deal with it? Well, how do you deal with a situation when a child's anxious? So that's how, as support services, we've been tackling it. But I think, it'd be good to do a bit of a snapshot in terms of where we think children are, because, as I say, what we're picking up is just concerns about particularly reception and the gaps there going into year 1, and another theme is the year 6 going into year 7. So that's where we've done loads of work on sort of like transitions and enhanced transitions, and making sure schools have got those set up for children to go to secondary school, because a lot of children in year 6 aren't going to be at the stage they ordinarily might have been ready to go into year 7. So the year 7 curriculum and the way it's set up in secondary schools is sort of needing to be a bit different. So I think we have a sense of where it's at from our conversations, but I think I'd like to do something a bit more on establishing that, a bit more clarity on that and what the gaps are. Dermot, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I think one of the things that is a difficulty for all local authorities is that there hasn't been clear guidance issued by Welsh Government or by anyone about how do we baseline everyone now coming back in. So each school is looking at, they know the children best, obviously. They know where they left off in terms of their learning trajectory, and all schools are now doing their own baselines, looking at the tools that they've got, knowing the children they have. And obviously, as Sarah's already mentioned, they've got very clear links with us, both through ALN and through learning support, looking at what the needs of those individual learners are. What we don't have is an overall snapshot of this is how much we've seen in terms of slippage in learning, or that sort of detailed picture. I think we've got elements of that, but we don't have a coordinated picture. So again, it'll come back to our discussions with schools around their school development plan. We're asking them through things like Celebrate, Share, Support and Refine, and through the other discussions we're having with them about what they've individually identified, and we'll look to support them. Schools are clearly in a very strong position budgetarily at the moment. Members will be aware, councillors will be aware, not all members of the committee, that schools have got a healthy surplus in general at the moment. So actually there's quite a lot of resource available as one-off funding. We'd like to see some continuation of additional funding, clearly, for support for children to learn and to catch up with their learning over the next 4 or 5 years, because I really think this is the legacy that we'll be looking at, and particularly for those younger children who maybe have not had the support they need during those really critical first 1,000 days. And after that, I think we'll see the tail on this for some time to come. So we haven't got that joined up position as best we would like it to be, but we're having discussions with colleagues across the region and across Wales about how can we best now look at baselining what children need at this point in time and how we move forward, and we'll be building that into the discussions with each individual school around baseline and around their SDP, so I should say, the school development plans we move forward in the autumn. We're also, I'm not sure if Sarah mentioned it, working with the Young People Forum to put together a survey based on lots of the stuff that the Children's Commissioner has done, I suspect, as a starting point, but working with children and young people themselves to look at the questions they want asked about what they think is relevant. And that survey we hope will be going out over the next, well, over this half term, and certainly will be complete before the summer, because we think that's a critical component in our own thinking about where we go next. Otherwise, the adults will be choosing what happens next, and I think it's really important that children and young people's voices is expressed in our planning as we go forward.
Dermot, Sarah, how do you define, or how do you assess the support of parents in these situations? Because some children have had really good support from their parents during the lockdown period, and some probably have improved. So how do you assess the support that the parents have given to the pupils?
Yeah, Sarah, can I come in there? I think it's not our role to assess parents. So particularly anyone watching this on YouTube later on, I want to make a point clear. We as a local authority won't be assessing know, parents, but I suppose the point in your question is quite right, which is about the variability of children's experience over this last year and, well, year and a bit now, isn't it? And that's been really, really quite a wide range of experience. So some children have prospered. It's really important, even though we've all been through this really tough time, to recognise that for some children and some families, actually they've come through this storm quite robustly. And for some learners, and we've picked this up with some vulnerable learners in schools as well, they really found a blended learning offer where they had the ability to step in and step out of learning at the pace that they really felt comfortable with, actually really positive. So there were some elements of what's happened which some children may have found difficult, and maybe some children who were quite able and talented who might have found quite difficult, some of the feedback is, and some children who found typical classroom experience more demanding have actually prospered. So this isn't, as always, complex problems don't have simple answers. What we're understanding now is that there's been a really very significant different range of experience caused by how the blended learning work has been put in place, and that's changed. So that's been variable between schools. Obviously, people's home experience has been very variable in terms of access to technology, in terms of parents' ability to support with time. Because obviously lots of parents have worked throughout the pandemic and haven't had the same time. So for us, this is about trying to look at where the individual learner is now, understand what they've struggled with or maybe what they've prospered with, and how do we build that into our planning going forward. So some schools are really thinking, for example, about how they keep online learning going as part of typical classroom experience, perhaps even. So that looked quite different between schools as we pull that learning together. So I'm sorry if that doesn't give a neat answer, because I think we're not going to get some neat answers to this. We're going to have to look at how do we keep the best elements of what we've developed. And again, Teams meetings, etc., are one of those really effective things that's emerged from the crisis. But what really good pieces of learning have we taken for schools and for individual learners, and build that into where we go next?
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Dermot. As I said, the question wasn't meant to be detrimental to parents, but just some people have age technology and we work in relationships. Yeah. So I thank you for putting the point over in the way that I should have. Okay. Thanks very much.
Councillor Jones, can I just come in there to just add and answer your question? Going back to our schools knowing their families best. Yeah. So where they've known those families perhaps don't have much access to any equipment or resources, schools have worked with them to take round either paper copies or lend them iPads and things. And with our Traveller Ed service, with that whole traveller community, we bought, a lot of iPads and various equipment and resources to take to those families. So it's gone back to really the staff knowing the families and making sure that they're supported, taking crayons, pens round, that kind of thing, where that's been helpful. So yeah, thank you.
Yes, we're very appreciative of all the work that was done.
Okay, I've got Cassidy with her hand up.
Sarah, it's really interesting for me to hear that the schools are mostly concerned about the learners' well-being and you know, issues around anxiety and stuff. Do we think, or do we know, if our ALN cohort have been affected more by these types of issues? Because we know a lot of them have social and communication difficulties, and being shut in a house with just their families for months probably hasn't helped a lot of them. And if so, do we have any specialist resources or anything that is going towards the ALN children to help them with their anxiety issues?
Okay, so in answer to your question, I think it's been very, very individual. So I think there are some children with ALN that have struggled more than children without ALN, but there's also been other children that we would have, you know, not had any concerns about who've struggled and vice versa. So it's been really mixed, and I think there's just so many factors around what, you know, family setup and whether parents have been working from home or whether they've been furloughed and not been working, and all of those factors have made a difference. I think where families have had to be working from home and there's like, you know, a mum, a dad and 2 children, they've all tried to be working. Having space in some family homes has been really challenging for people. And we all say for children, don't we, don't set up like your workstation in your bedroom. It's not a good thing, you know, to do. But for some families, they're living in very cramped accommodation. So I would say, in answer to your question, it's been very individual. I wouldn't say it's necessarily been worse for all the children with ALN. But what we did throughout the time when, you know, basically when the pandemic started in March, what we were doing is contacting schools to work with them to identify their most vulnerable children. And we were working closely with social care in terms of them identifying their most vulnerable children, because those two groups were different. So the ones social care had identified as their most vulnerable were different from the ones in school. So that's why we had a comprehensive plan in place to make sure all of the ones that were deemed vulnerable by the school and social care had the offer at one of our hubs that we set up. So we supported through that. Then those children that were at home, again, the children with ALN that were known to our department, we had a system whereby our teams were ringing those homes regularly, at least once a week, just as a kind of check-in with them to say, how's it going, are you okay? And then the psychology service were involved in that as well. So we had our link officers and psychologists all kind of having a system where they contact the families, and where families were struggling, quite a few families used that offer of support from the psychologists to talk about what they were worried about. Okay, so that's what we did throughout the pandemic. And then when they've been back in school, there's at the minute, there's kind of so much going on around supporting social, emotional, mental health and well-being. There's a pilot project going on in the or just starting in the Westmont cluster, and we have our Healthy Schools lead who's also been working with staff in schools around well-being. She's been supporting the staff and students. So one of the things I've been doing with colleagues is trying to just join up all the dots in all of those different things that are happening, because health have their Gwent community psychology team. They have, I won't go into the details now, but they just have, within health, there's so many different teams doing things. So one of the things I've undertaken to do with colleagues is just make sure it's all joined up. We know who's doing what, because we really don't want to duplicate things and we don't want gaps. So that's why it's been really key. We all know what everybody is doing in all of this. Otherwise, for schools, it's so confusing. They think, well, who do I go to for what? I'm really confused, which is why I like that model of having the go-to people that you say, right, what do I do about this? Where do I go? And if they can't, if it's not their role to help directly, they signpost on. So, Councillor Evans, does that answer that question for you?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, I've got John next.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. This is more of an observation. What Dermot just correctly described about children's education experience of COVID times exemplifies that the gap we've spent years trying to close has actually widened in some cases for a number of children, and it may be something this committee wants to come back to at some time.
I think that's a fair point. Okay, there's 3 questions next, so it's all just sort of yes and no, so if I just ask them together. Are we confident that all schools have amended their development plans to take into account transformation to ALN as stated within 4.5 of the report? Have all our schools developed a robust ALN policy? And have all our schools got designated ALN codes in place to provide support to pupils with ALN?
Okay, so let's start with the last one and work backwards. So yes, they all have designated ALN codes. Obviously, I did mention I'm aware of definitely one colleague retiring in the summer. So we're keeping a close eye to work with a new person. So yes, apart from where they're leaving, then we need to do that new piece of work with them. The robust ALN policy, well, basically, Welsh Government have said that they don't feel schools need an ALN policy because they have the code. So that's the thinking. But what we've actually decided to do is one of our regional ALN codes has drafted one. So the plan is that we will share that with schools to just see what they think of it and if they'd like to adapt it so that they can have their own ALN policy and put that on their website, because the code is very, very lengthy and very long, and it's almost just having a succinct version of that in terms of what that school's offering. So that's our plan for that. So that's not in place, but that's a kind of, will be. Your question about the development plan. So we have asked them to do that. I personally don't get to see their development plans because one of my colleagues has a role in doing that. So that's something I need to take back and work with my colleague just to check from what he's seen. Is that now in place? Have I answered all of those questions? Dermot, I can see you want to come in. Yeah.
If I just add there, the school development plans we'll be looking at with schools over the tail end of this term and early in the autumn. So that's when we'll pick up that in the cycle. But we absolutely have raised that with all schools in the past. And actually, when we went through, we don't in previous years we haven't looked at every SDP in detail and brought the schools in. Brought the schools in to look at them. We've looked at each of the SDPs. The majority of schools had already put quite a bit of focus on that or had some input in that in their SDPs. But we're making it very clear, obviously, that we expect to see that in their SDPs. And we're meeting with the heads later today and tomorrow. The secondaries today, secondaries tomorrow, I think it is. And that will be something that we'll be raising with them now in preparation for the work in the autumn.
Great. Okay, can I ask Michelle then to ask question 3?
Okay, thank you. Cranbridge, using person-centred planning across the school has been deemed as being an effective practice on the Estyn website. In the thematic report of 2018, has their model been considered and used within other schools, and could other schools learn from this effective practice?
I think that's a really good point. Person-centred planning is something we've rolled out training, and one of our colleagues in the department has led on that. And I would say in some schools it works really, really well. In others, it's still in progress. So I think it's certainly something we could look at how they're, revisit how it's working well in Cranbridge and how it can be replicated. Some of the things to bear in mind, because Cranbridge is a very different context, it's our special school, the ratio of staff to children is much, much higher than in our mainstream schools. So we need to bear that in mind in thinking about our models and how we do that. But Michelle, that's a really good point, really good question, really good point. And I would take that back and certainly look at that again.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Overton, could you ask question 5, please?
Yes, certainly, Chair. How will you ensure consistent preparation of IDPs in all our schools, and how will this be monitored?
Okay, so this goes back to we have a group of schools trialling this at the moment. So the CSOG statutory offers group that I mentioned earlier as part of our collaboration theme has been leading on this. We've had schools testing this out, and also looking at this online version of removing barriers to achievement. So again, what we want to do next is roll that out to all our schools. It's about setting that up online so they all have access to it. So it's partly in rolling out the training from that we've done with those pilot schools in a cluster, looking at the removing barriers online and making sure that because that can be accessed by those pilot schools, but we need to roll that out across all of them. And in terms of the monitoring, that will be done by, we have our ALN link officers who are going into, who are the named people with every school. So a process of them doing that and bringing that back to the CSOG consortium group that I mentioned, and looking at some sampling of how that's going.
Okay, Michelle, did you want to come in?
It's a supplementary, really. Within the report, there's reference to the capacity of Capita being a real concern. Just keen to understand as to how you intend to unpick that moving forward to remove the barriers to progress in that.
Michelle, that's a really good point, because Welsh Government are prepared to put in some funding for us to have the components of Capita that we need. So we've had a series of kind of demos on different sort of platforms and portals, and once you start unpicking it, it is so much more complicated than I imagined. So we're now at a point where we're thinking we've got a possible solution that will cost something like it will cost £15,000 a year, and Welsh Government are prepared to give us something like 40. So that will cover it for just under 3 years, and then we need to secure funding to pay for that going forward. But having explored various platforms, we've also looked at Synergy, which is what Caerphilly use. We've explored various modules, systems, processes, platforms, and that's our best conclusion. I think actually 15 grand a year seems very reasonable and it will give us what we need. So that's where we are with that one.
Thank you.
Okay, Colette, could you ask question 7, please?
This is a question raised by a member of the public who says that her child has been at comprehensive school for 3 years now, and despite continual requests, an LA plan has not been established or delivered. In light of the impact of COVID on learning of all students, how will the LA address the current shortfalls in delivery and capacity and the additional impact of COVID on these students?
Okay, so if a parent or a school requests a statutory assessment process is started, that goes to a panel who make that decision. If it's declined, there is feedback to the parent and school as to why it's declined, because at the moment with the process of statutory assessments, it's those children that have the most significant complex needs. So if you think of a triangle of need, it would be the top 2% of the children in our population that have the most complex needs. So if it was declined, it would have been because the evidence at the panel did not make the panel feel that those child's needs were so significantly complex that they would have needed to have go through that statutory process. So that's if that's what that parent was asking. But what happens pre the statutory process is that the school have their sort of ALN plans in place. So that is a matter for the school to be supporting that. So in terms of this particular individual case, if I were to have the name of the child and the details, I could unpick exactly what might have happened in that case. But in answer to just thinking of this generally, parents, schools can request statutory assessments, and then it goes through that process with an evidence base to deem if their needs are significant enough. But if they don't, if a statutory assessment isn't started, the aim is that the school should be supporting through an assess, plan, do, review, and a graduated response to that child's needs.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Kathy, your question next. I think it's number 8.
Thank you. Can I just, on the last question that Councillor Thomas asked, I think very often schools are under the impression that they have a duty to meet the diagnosis of a child, that's what, but it's not, it's the needs of the child. They should be supporting the needs of the child far before diagnosis. If a child has needs, they should be met by the school regardless of whether there is a diagnosis in place, and I think sometimes schools tend to forget that. Right, my question. So it's been brought to my attention that the Welsh language schools have not been able to provide the appropriate support to ALN pupils, both during the pandemic and whilst children have also been in school environment, because of a lack of trained teachers and teaching assistants who are both ALN trained and Welsh speakers. Is this going to be an issue going forward, and how will this be managed?
Okay, Dermot, do you want me to start, and then, or do you want to start this one?
Well, if I start, I think there's a general issue, members, with the provision of ALN through Welsh Medium anyway. It's something that we get asked about in every visit we have with Estyn, and obviously we're looking at our WESP at the moment to see how we can expand the provision that we have available. So we're lucky in that we've got Welsh Medium speaking EP, Welsh language EP in Torfaen. Not every authority has that. But at a local authority level, we get very little bespoke Welsh medium provision. In fact, we've only got individual members of individual teams who can provide that on a spot basis, as it were. So we're in discussion with our colleagues in Gwynclw, early discussions about how we can expand provision in that school. Obviously, it's soon to be a 3 to 19 school, so it'd be really helpful to have additional learning needs provision through the medium of Welsh based in the school, and that discussion's at an early stage, but really positive discussions are happening there. In terms of individual schools, I mean, I think it goes back to the point that Sarah's raised previously. If there are individual instances where members are aware of concerns, please outside this meeting, let's have those discussions. I don't think we've had direct feedback from any of the Welsh Medium primary school heads that they've had difficulty, and obviously members, you'll know that we've been meeting with heads on a weekly basis up until a few months ago, and then they've moved to fortnightly, and it's not one that's come through particularly. So if there are specific instances where you feel that there's been a particular issue, please get in touch with Sarah and we'll try and address those individually. Sarah, I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that.
It's just thinking in terms of the what happened during the pandemic. I know that our Welsh secondary school set up some, I think they called it Cwtch sessions, where children could join online virtually, because what happens for some of our students attending our Welsh speaking schools is they don't have Welsh speaking parents, so it's been difficult for them to keep up that language sort of practice that they would have been receiving in school. So school set up, we had a kind of problem solving session with the school to look at a number of things, and they were setting up these Cwtch sessions that were going really well, and staff were joining them as well, because equally for the staff, a number of the Welsh speaking staff at Gwynclw, they are in families where they don't speak Welsh at home either. So this was actually, I just thought it was such a brilliant idea of them to set this up, and it was going really well. So I would say that they were aware of what was happening during the pandemic. And again, those children were invited in at various stages of the pandemic when schools reopened. Gwyntley was opened for their most vulnerable children, so the ones where, you know, where they really did need to be in, where they had ALN needs, were actually going into school. So I feel that Gwyntley recognised the need and were trying to address it by doing those things. So inviting in the vulnerable ALN learners, or the ALN learners who were deemed vulnerable, and also by setting up these Cwtch online sessions. It was, you know, certainly they were attempting to kind of address that, and we were problem solving what else they could do around that.
Thank you.
Okay, Michelle?
Supplementary, really, picking up on Dermot's comments of earlier in terms of the early year settings in the first 1,000 days, in terms of the support that's been provided for Welsh language pupils parents who want to express a preference to go on to primary schools, in terms of the support that's actually there for those settings.
Sorry, Chair, is the question about what support's in place for those now, or, sorry, I'm not clear. Sorry.
It's in terms of, given the concerns have been raised around Welsh language in mainstream, in preschool and early year settings, what support is available there, and are there any significant challenges with everything else we've just talked about?
Yeah, so pre-pandemic, we had been in close discussion with Midian Maithrin, looking at the development of additional Maithrin in Torfaen, and you know, I think the biggest, I think I haven't got the detail in front of me. I think 2 of those have been established previously, and we're keen as part of our West work to obviously work with Midian Maithrin in establishing additional Welsh medium provision. As you'd imagine, bearing in mind we're building a new Welsh medium primary, we're keen to get children into Welsh medium provision as early as we possibly can. The biggest issue we've had goes back to the point I think we raised earlier, which is about getting staff. So particularly in well, I think it's across all sectors at the moment, or all phases, I should say, attracting staff and having staff in this area who've got the Welsh language skills is probably the biggest barrier we have. Really strong partnership developing with Midian Maithrin, but I think the challenges we're both facing is around procurement of appropriate staff, and that probably is the biggest barrier. Again, going back to your point that Sarah raised earlier, you know, we're around where you build a provision, it tends to fill, albeit Sarah was talking about ALN. That's certainly been our experience with Welsh medium provision as well. So we know if we can get it up and running, we're confident that we'll see growth. But the biggest barrier we have at the moment is absolutely around provision. So we're having separate discussions with Kevin Palmer and Welsh Government, particularly around how we can support schools like Gwynclwyd to attract people in, and how we can find support for alternative routes into teaching. We're thinking about what we can do at that sector, in that age range, around also maybe attracting people who are currently in English medium schools but have effective Welsh language skills to come into the sector. So we're doing some thinking and work around that. And I think that's where we need to go next in terms of what we can do to support Welsh medium development in preschool settings as well. There's always a bit of a problem with this, and there's a bit of an ethical one, which is where if we do try to attract staff from English medium schools at the moment, but where those practitioners have got effective Welsh medium skills, we obviously may create a difficulty in English medium schools. So there's always that balance. So it's something that we've flagged with Welsh Government. Our big challenge is getting the staff with the skills that we need. And we need Welsh Government support to be able to do that at all levels, because we can't grow enough as local authorities. And that's something, you know, as part of Welsh Government's aspiration for 1 million speakers, I think they need to invest in, and we take every opportunity to raise it with them. But in the meantime, that's what we need to, what we're trying to do. But it is a challenge.
Yeah. Okay, Glyn.
Thank you, Chair. Do you think it would be useful if I asked my Welsh language question at this point, or do you want me to delay it till later?
Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, this one is probably aimed more at Dermot in the sense that it's a yes or no to the first part of the question, and then a second, if it's no, then the second part of the question is completely irrelevant. Is it true that Welsh language schools are losing pupils due to COVID as a result of parents not being able to homeschool because they're from an English-speaking family? And if that is the case, how will this combine with ALN funding pressures and be managed going forward?
I think it's too early to say the absolute reason was because of COVID, but I suspect the answer is yes, is how I would answer it, because I don't know for a fact, because we really need to go and now as we hopefully all return to a more typical time, perhaps do a survey of those families who've made a different choice to try and understand why, because families haven't always declared the reason why they've moved. I think it probably is likely because of the challenges and the pressures that they've faced at home. Now, what we don't know yet, of course, is that hopefully now with all children, or nearly all children, coming back into school, and certainly attendance rates are improving, will we see those families go back to Welsh medium? And it's obviously too early to say that. It may be that we've lost them. I don't know. Time will tell on that one. So there will be a compounding issue then in terms of funding. I wouldn't say around ALN, because obviously the funding for ALN is tied to the individual learner. So if schools have lost funding because of a child moving around ALN, that will just be commensurate with the needs of the child, and that child will get funding where they go. They will clearly lose other funding in terms of the weighted pupil unit and so on, and that could impact on schools. So it is something we're talking to the Welsh medium heads about on an ongoing basis. It's something that we're monitoring, obviously, through admissions very closely as well. At the moment, we're not picking up this is going to destabilize schools where they are. I mentioned earlier, excuse me, about the significant increase in funding that's come into schools over the last year. But obviously we've said to all schools, that's one-off funding. We're very mindful of that. All of the finance officers will be having the medium-term financial planning discussions that we have on a regular basis with schools. And I've raised it with schools at our all school meetings on a couple of occasions, and I'll be mentioning it again, is that we need to think carefully about the choices we use with that funding and look at what the short and medium term impacts might be because of some of the changes we've seen. So I think it's just too early to say definitively, is it a yes, no? I suspect it's a yes, but it's also too early to say, is there going to be a longer term impact in terms of funding? Because I think we'll see more change when it comes back, when schools come back in the autumn. But we monitor things very closely in terms of the funding for schools, and all of our schools have a 3-year medium-term financial plan, and we review that with them on several occasions during the year. So I think we've got the systems in place to pick up any sensitivities and to intervene quickly with schools to try and make sure that they don't get into financial difficulty.
Thank you.
Just a bit of a speculative one, actually, that just occurred to me. Obviously, it's mainly an impact in schools, but with lots of people who have been homeschooling, if they decide to continue or they decide not to enrol, how will we deal with ALN needs for homeschoolers going forward? Do we have plans in place? Just thinking ahead.
So if families choose to electively home educate and their child has ALN, then that's their choice. We do not have a duty or responsibility to do anything additional for those families if the children have ALN or if they don't, because the view is, our offer is to support those children in our educational settings. Does that make sense? So there's not
thanks for that. Just thought about it then if people did continue homeschooling. Okay, Glenn, your questions on post 16.
It's taking forever to unmute. Sorry about that. I'll take both of these questions together, I think. My first question was, who is responsible for post 16? But then if I add the second question on at the end, I think it'll help you make more sense of where I'm coming from with that. So if the person attends a post 16 college at Cwmbran, what are Torfaen Council's responsibilities? Because obviously it gets difficult for us because they don't have any responsibility to the local authority, do they?
So under the new code, what we've been doing is, as part of that whole post-16 work stream, is working very closely with the colleges. So there's been a whole working group looking at that, looking at transitions, and we've had some funding from the ALN Transformation Grant to pay for additional time for one of our team to be part of that working group, looking at developing protocol systems in terms of enhanced transition. So basically there are strong links with the college in sort of supporting them in looking at what they need from support services going forward. You know, we've been thinking in terms of our educational psychology time, how we can support the college, because before that hasn't been something that's been sort of requested or asked for. So in answer to your question, it's about the links with the college, and also as part of that, linking with Careers Wales. They've been key, and we start linking with them from for children in year 9 who've got a statement. So in terms of the responsibility, I would say within the ALN, you know, our teams look at that. There isn't a one single name person involved for post-16 at the minute. That's something we might look at for future, but it's something that, as I say, as part of that post-16 working group, the links with the colleges are being developed. We have had named people involved in that, and going forward, that's something we will look at, whether we need named people. But it is, as a department, it's all of our responsibility, if that makes sense. But it is a new responsibility that we haven't had before. Does that answer the question, Councillor Karen?
Sort of, but I was sort of coming at that, and you know, so is your question, I mean, you know, I'm not looking more for a yes or no answer to this, which may not be possible, but is it our responsibility to make sure that the post-16 college has got these plans in place, or are making these plans work?
Okay, so if it's an LA IDP, yes, it is. If it's the what's deemed a school or college IDP, it's the college's responsibility.
Okay.
Does that make sense, Councillor Garron? So there's 2 types of IDPs in the new code.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. But then it comes to then it comes to my next question in a way, in that how can we ensure that the local authority IDP is being dealt with correctly by the college?
So that's where we have our annual review process. That's where that mechanism comes in terms of, you know, the key people around the table with the family, with the child, looking at that. And, you know, if the college aren't fulfilling statutory obligations, it would be exactly the same process as if our schools aren't or our nursery settings aren't following that process. In terms of the challenge from the local authority back, it would be exactly the same. So they're almost coming into the fold now under the same systems and processes that are sort of we would apply for schools and nursery settings. Dermot, did you want to?
Thanks, Sarah. The Chair, it's okay. I'd just add to that. Obviously, pre-COVID seems like a long time ago, but back before all this kicked off, we had already agreed a partnership agreement and process with Coleg Gwent as part of the work towards building the new college. The terms of reference for that are already agreed. Now, we haven't put that in motion because obviously everything that's intervened, but we will now be going ahead and putting those meetings in place between the local authority and Coleg Gwent. And these are the sorts of issues that if we were experiencing any difficulty in terms of that interface between both statutory bodies, then we could actually look at that as part of that that partnership agreement. So that's another level that we've got to give us that global overview of how well everything's going. If there are any problems, it gives us a problem-solving forum to discuss at a senior level. So that would be attended by myself, for example, with Guy Lacey from Coleg Gwent, with the exec member for education, and perhaps the chair of the board, or one of the senior board members from Coleg Gwent, to look at the overall working. So we've obviously developed a very close working relationship with Coleg Gwent, and we anticipate that will continue to go from strength to strength. And we're obviously very keen to see how well our children are doing. And Coleg Gwent are quite keen to show off how well they're doing for our pupils too, because they're our pupils together. And I think that's a very clear central tenet in that partnership agreement.
Okay, John, your hand's up.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, the question that Glenn asks there, it seems to open some very murky waters to me in terms of the partnerships that are required under the Act, because who a child or a young person or even an adult refers to once past 16 changes, and I'm concerned as to whether those different partnerships have been made, or whether we've been focusing just on the 16 and under. Everything is has a relative ease at up to 16, and then I say it becomes very murky.
If I come back to comment on that, and again, Councillor Kill, you're right. We still don't have an effective continuing healthcare agreement in place, I would say, in terms of tripartite funding with health. Certainly not in our borough. I know it functions elsewhere, perhaps better than it does here. And there are challenges. Now, the DECLA role was fundamentally part of Welsh Government's thinking about how we can overcome some of those barriers. And obviously, we've worked closely with Dave Williams, the DECLA, for a long number of years. And I'm confident that we'll see some really good progress and close working. Sarah's described all of the work that's gone in place to make sure that we've got the right structures in place. We also have the Regional Partnership Board and the Children and Families Group that sits underneath that. And obviously we've got the PSB to also look at some of those issues in terms of how we can promote more effective multi-agency working and joint ownership of how do we actually support these families. The Act's intent was always, it's a long time now since we started having discussions about the Act, and it's more than 10 years, but the central sort of point was trying to make things more simple and straightforward. All I would say is we've done everything that we can, we think, to put the right scaffolding in place, to put the processes in place. I have no doubt there will be teething issues. There always are with a complex piece of legislation, but there's a real willingness and commitment, I think, across the region from officers in all agencies to try and make this work. So we will do our very best to tackle those issues as they arise in the spirit that we have always done, which is one where we solve problems together. So as they arise, I think we will find solutions. And if we don't, we're still going to be talking to Welsh Government about what else support we might need. I think with the introduction of the commencement orders back in April and some of the new requirements that came in, which obviously didn't feature in this report because it was prepared before the commencement orders were issued, there are some things that we know we're working with Welsh Government on at the moment to try and resolve, and we'll continue to do that. And I'm sure we'll get the best implementation that we can.
Could I just add to that, Chair, that I mentioned health, social services, but there is also a swathe of organisations from the voluntary sector that we will be working with, and they have some, at times, very strict rules on what age groups they're working with, which might result absolutely in having to work with a completely different organisation on the same topic because of the age group that the young person relates to.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, Kath next.
Sorry, Chair, I'm a little bit lost. I had a phone call.
Sorry. This is your question 3 on
question 3.
Yeah.
Right. So this is an issue that's been raised by a member of the public. They feel that there is a lack of provision for young people with ALN when they leave school. This particular parent confirmed that their child left Crownbridge last year and was due to transition into daycare provided by social services. But because a lot of the centres were closed during lockdown, transition and communication seems to have stalled, and no further feedback has been received since this time. Obviously, as members, we can't expect you to provide a full comment on this without finding out further details. But what additional services do we offer in Torfaen to support families with young people who have ALN once they leave school and up until the age of 25, obviously?
If I come in there first, I think it's really important to bear in mind that this piece of legislation isn't about bringing together all of children and young people services for youngsters with ALN up to the age of 25. So the legislation is about the education provision that we're making, and there's still an expectation that post 16, my understanding at the moment from case law is that the expectation around provision of education provision would last for 2 years, in exceptional cases 3. After that, there would be no further education. But your question's about then, what are we doing as a council, I think, about providing support for youngsters, young adults with ALN after they leave school. And obviously that's the responsibility that sits currently within social care and with adult services in social care. So it's not one where we can answer directly, I think, today. We need to take that away and ask social care colleagues to comment on it.
And who would provide the transition? Would that be education, or would that be social care, or would that be a joint endeavour to transition a young person from, say, Crownbridge into?
It's joint already. There is already a very clear transition process in place. And obviously then in terms of what provision is available, that's an issue that social care could comment on in more detail. But those transition arrangements are very well developed and already in place. I understand where the question's coming from. I think there's been a lot of reduction in service over the last year. There's had to be, clearly, because it wasn't safe. And I think, you know, all of us were really keen to try and put as much provision in place as we possibly could. But clearly there have been, you know, a lot of instances where that just wasn't practicable, wasn't safe, and there's been a reduction. And I really do understand that lots of families have found that really tough. But in terms of going forward, in terms of looking at that provision map, we can obviously take that question via Leanne into colleagues in social care and see if we can get a more rounded answer.
Thank you. Can we also make sure that any parents such as this who, you know, whose child was due to transition and hasn't because of COVID, that they just kept informed and communicated with, you know, and just a phone call just to let them know what's going on?
And then again, if you can give us the specific details outside the meeting, then we'll obviously follow up.
Yeah, to all the members of the public that raised specific questions on Facebook, I've informed Sarah that I'm going to forward them on to her for a response after the meeting.
Okay, we've got a few questions then on potential appeals. So if I start, are there clear reasons provided to parents by schools on why a request for an IDP has been declined, and an opportunity for the council, school and parents to work together to find a suitable resolution rather than having to go through the formal appeals process?
Okay, so the current system continues to be requests for statutory process. So we haven't got the request for IDPs process in place until September, and that's why we're waiting on the implementation guidelines from Welsh Government, because that will tell us in detail how we're going to run the current system with the new system. So where parents request a statutory assessment, parents or schools can request this. It goes to our panel that's run by LA officers, and they do provide in writing a letter back to parents as to if that statutory assessment does not get initiated. They provide information back, and then the link officer that I described earlier, that we have a name link officer structure for each school, will then arrange or offer, certainly, to meet with parents if they want to. If they don't, then that's their choice, but there's certainly the offer of a meeting with the parents and the school to just discuss that and talk to the school about what it would be good for them to be putting in place as part of their graduated response. Because just because we've, as a local authority, don't feel that child's in the top 2% of the most significant complex needs, It doesn't mean we're not saying that child doesn't have needs. We're just saying we don't deem them as having the most significant complex needs enough to warrant starting a statutory assessment. So it would be back to the school to for them to look at what provision they can put in place to meet the child's needs as part of a graduated response.
Thanks. Okay, there's a few more here. Again, you might not be able to answer because the guidance isn't out, but if I just ask Victoria then to ask question 2, if that's okay.
Okay, so question 2 is, how do you plan on mitigating the potential for appeals going to SNE tribunals? As you state, you have been working on Snap Cymru to mitigate this risk.
Okay, so to date, we're very pleased to say that in Torfaen we have not had any cases go to Sendis Tribunal. And I think the success of that has been down to schools working very positively with parents and local authority colleagues getting involved where that hasn't gone so well, and Snap Cymru also getting involved to support really in terms of problem solving framework to sort of look at what can be put in place before it gets to that point. Once the new code starts in September, I anticipate potentially, possibly, we will have cases where schools feel the needs of the child are sort of more significant than they can manage and will want there to be an LA IDP. And as an LA, we might not feel the needs warrant it. So there may be situations where we don't feel as a local authority the need is significant enough, and then it might be a case where parents want to take that further. But the aim will be, we're currently, again, that's another piece of regional work that's being looked at, is you know, the role of Snap Cymru, because they are supporting, we host the contract for them as a region. So again, it's sort of looking at mitigating those risks and having mediation in place, dispute resolution and all sorts. So there's various things being written up on that at the moment, ready for September. So I'm almost sort of hoping for the best, but planning for you know, in the event that there are cases, then, you know, we do need robust systems in place, which, as I say, are being drawn up now.
Okay, John.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, the issue about Snap Cymru. So I had thought that before you said what you said just then, Sarah, that it was that they were funded by the local authority. How then is their SLA monitored to ensure that what Snap Cymru does is what the parent wants, rather than what the local authority might prefer them to do, because those two things may be in conflict, you know, where the funder and the recipient are in conflict with each other. And I say that because I have had concerns when I've sat on exclusion appeals panels. So yeah, I shouldn't go into, obviously, I wouldn't go into any detail about the precision, the exact nature of them, but my concern is that they do support parents, given that at times they may be biting the hand that feeds them.
Councillor Killick, it's a really good pertinent question. They are funded by the local authority. That's right. We host the contract for the 5 local authorities. In terms of the SLA, basically what we've looked at is just measures like, have they been available to respond in a timely manner? They are independent, so they are there to support. The aim is they are there to support the parents. I can't comment on, obviously, individual cases. We'd need to unpick those separately. But yeah, if there's any concerns around individual cases, I mean, their role is to act impartially. So our measures are really that they're responding, that they're supporting parents in a timely manner. you know, and the outcome's got to be what's in the best interest for the child. And in exclusions, you know, those are all very tricky situations for all the reasons we know. But yeah, the key is they are impartial and supporting the parents.
But would you ever research those parents to ask them if the work that SNAP has done in carrying out their SLA was satisfactory to the parent as the recipient of that service?
That's something I would need to take that away and look at that and check if that has been done, Councillor Killock.
Yeah, thank you.
Just to add to that, if that's okay, Chair, obviously there's a tender that goes out that's been agreed by the 5 local authorities, and within that there is obviously performance management information. So again, Councillor Killick, it's something that is a difficult one. I think one of the things that we want to make sure to anyone who goes into that tender process when it gets issued is that the funding, we don't tell SNAP what to do. Mm-hmm. What we've detailed in the tender for the service are the requirements that we as 5 local authorities feel will provide the best possible advocacy service for parents. And it's very clear within that tender that we will not micromanage or get involved in individual casework to in any way influence the work that SNAP do within the overall brief of the specification that we've issued. So that separation is really important, and I think having one authority do it on behalf of 5 gives another layer of separation as well. Because if they've got a concern, you know, they'll come to us. Individual local authorities don't need to speak to them. We try and keep it as separate as we can, and we obviously monitor that contract on an annual basis as well. The issue about feedback is an interesting one, and it might be one that we take back to our partner authorities. It's always that difficulty about what parents' expectations are about advocacy and what outcome that they expect. And how do we get a good measure of people's satisfaction with the service? For some parents, for example, they may want to go into support with SNAP in order to get the statement or to get a certain level of provision. And if they don't get that, might that impact on their judgment of what quality of service they've had, for instance? So it's not a straightforward one to look at, but it's certainly one, Sarah, we can look at with SNAP and reflect on.
Thank you.
Okay, Janet, could you ask question 3, please?
Yes, Chair. On question 3, it's how will you ensure clear, consistent right of appeal as outlined in para 3.2, where it says clear and consistent rights of appeal? How will you deal with it within the report, please?
So that's a piece of work. As I say, we're maximising on the post of having Tracy Peed as a regional lead on doing this on behalf of the region in terms of structuring all that, and she's written documents on various things which will go up on our Torfaen website once they're completed, and it's a piece of work outlining exactly what those rights of appeal are, what people can expect from a mediation service, and what to do. But at the nub of it all is, you know, when there's unhappiness or dissatisfaction, encouraging parents and carers to talk to the key staff in the school, whether it's a primary school or secondary school. It's talking to them about their concerns, getting support services that I've mentioned before involved at that stage to have a problem solving consultation around what can do. So it's about what we're really keen on is just trying to support families and look at addressing problems at the start rather than waiting until it gets really difficult and adversarial. And as I say, so far to date in Torfaen, we have not had any tribunals, but I know from my colleagues in the region that a number of them are involved in actually spending all their time in tribunals at the moment, and that's with the current system. So, you know, I'm sort of hoping that the things we've had in place with our schools and the systems with families to support them, I'm hoping that will carry us through any tricky times we might have ahead. But so I'm kind of, as I say, it's just having things in place for in the event that there are difficulties. We need to be clear and upfront and open about what the processes of appeal are, because families have a right to that. But really emphasising, let's try and sort this out before it gets to that point. You know, it's as Dermot said, if families do feel they really want a statutory assessment under the current system, an IDP under the future one, as a local authority, we don't feel the child's needs warrant that. We need to unpick that to look at, okay, so what support can be put in place for that child? Because at the moment, you see, we have a system where we have children in our special schools and our resource bases that don't have a statement. So they do have significant and complex needs, but they don't have a statement. Under the new system, they will all have to have an IDP. So that's a change. So whereas before we've thought, well, we've got the provision available, they don't need to go through a statutory process to get the provision, because the whole point is to have the provision. So that will be a change.
Thanks, Jade. Thanks, Sarah.
Okay, Michelle, could you ask question 4, please?
We've talked about financially at the moment, it's quite good. We also know that post-pandemic there will be a payback. So with that as the backdrop, how are we going to plan to meet the costs associated with the cases going to tribunal, especially if they were to go in the family's favour?
Okay, so to date we have not had that situation. But if we do have that situation, the tribunal find in favour of the family, one outcome would be we have to go over numbers in one of our provisions. That could be a potential outcome, or it could be that we have to fund a specialist residential placement somewhere else. We have a protocol in place with social care where where there are care needs, that there would be joint funding, and where there are health needs, we're looking at tri-funding that, so that all the costs don't just fall on education. But fundamentally we wouldn't have any choice, we just have to pay it. And we do have some contingency funding that we could draw upon if that were to be the case for some children. If that started to get into larger numbers, we would need to be thinking again.
Just to add to that, Chair, obviously ALN reform has been part of the corporate risk register for some time. One of the points we've been talking to Welsh Government about as ADU, is the Association Director of Education in Wales, as our group has been, we don't think this is cost neutral. Members might be aware that we've been told this is cost neutral. I don't anticipate that's going to be the case, and they've asked us to provide them with the evidence for it. And in a way, it's almost a parallel, Michelle, to your question about, well, what's going to happen when this starts, and nobody knows yet. And until we're in it, we won't really know what the impact is going to be. We've tried to anticipate, and I think Sarah's outlined how we've tried to anticipate all of the challenges we might face, but it may well be the case we get into the new system, and we do see our really good record of avoiding tribunal and also managing our out-of-county budget really well, that being challenged, and that's something we've raised as a corporate risk. We obviously were really lucky to see an additional £700,000 uplift to ALN funding this year, which schools have benefited from. So, we've been anticipating as much as we possibly can corporately how to support schools so they can support parents, to give them that reassuring message that whether you have an IDP or not, Torfaen has always taken the approach, we're here to meet your needs. Whatever the label is, whatever the diagnosis, whatever the process is, we want to make sure our schools feel they've got the skills, they've got the training, they've got the resource to meet those needs. So we are hopeful that that will take us a long way, but we do recognise that given any change in the system, where parents are quite rightly anxious about the outcome for their child, we may see some challenge over the first year or two. We're as prepared as we can be. We've obviously put it on the risk register just to flag up to members that there may be a situation where we come back and say we'll need a further additional uplift. But we think we've put all the right measures in place to try and manage that as best we can.
Wow. These are a couple more questions around the funding. So how is long-term funding being provided by Welsh Government to help with requirements and implementation of the Act? And will that funding be provided year on year, or do we know? And any other plans around the mitigation of the potential financial implications as outlined in 6.1?
If I talk about the transitional funding, then see if you want to come in. Obviously, Welsh Government have been providing transitional funding for provision of the transformation leads and training and support both for school social care and for health colleagues. That transitional funding continues this year. At this point, we don't think that there's going to be any additional transitional funding. The vast majority of that funding, of course, hasn't come in directly to local authorities or into schools. It's gone to schools via support for their Elencos and the training, for example. It's also funded some some support in social care and health. So that transitional funding, we think, ends. I've mentioned that this is all cost neutral, according to Welsh Government's impact assessment. We continue to raise our concerns about that assessment, but we won't know until we get into it where we go. And as I've already mentioned, this council is obviously taking really supportive steps to help us with additional funding for ALN. It's already in place. Sarah, I don't know if there's anything else you can add to that.
I think it's going back to the funding for Capita that Michelle, where Michelle raised that question. So we know we've got that commitment of around 40k. So that's really helpful. But yeah, otherwise they are saying it's cost neutral and we have to manage it basically. So in terms of mitigating the risks, it's about just making sure that we're trying to deal with disputes, issues, unhappiness early on, supporting the schools to do what they need to do under their responsibilities, and that we're aware of issues and we intervene where needed. And and making sure that financially we're making best use of the grants, because we have had ALN grants in addition up till now, but we've had no confirmation of anything further. But we've really been utilising our ALN grants to sort of in the preparation and planning of all of this going forward.
Thanks. Okay, John, you okay to ask question 3 for us?
Yep. Another question from a member of the public under section 6.1. It mentions the financial implications in relation to staffing if there is an increase in requests for more LA IDPs. And the person says, I'm a little surprised that as a council, we're only taking into consideration the financial implications of staffing in terms of the request for LA IDPs. Surely this would be a good opportunity for the council to review the whole process and look at further cost implications versus the opportunity to save costs which could be applied to further specialist school placements or dedicated support within mainstream schools. What are your views on this?
So I think that's a really good question and a fair point. So as an LA, we were sort of looking at initially the costs of IDPs is staffing if they're in terms of if they're in our own LA provision. We are looking at all of our provision as a whole. So our offer is what we've got, what we're supporting mainstream schools to do, the resource bases I talked about, and our special school. And we are looking at what we might need going forward. We've been thinking about that over the last couple of years, and we're also doing a piece of work with some data engineers who are very kind of competent at looking at doing projections over the next 10 years of what we might need. So based on all of that, looking at what we've got currently, what we might need on future based on live birth data and the needs of children, in terms of are we needing more specialist provision, what else do we need to support our mainstream schools to do. So it's a good point, well made, very fair, and yes, we are definitely looking at all of that.
Okay, can I ask Richard then to ask the next question, which is the first one under the engagement section?
How will you ensure that you provide information to children and young people to help raise awareness and understanding of the new system and the rights of appeal?
Okay, so as part of the piece of work we're doing now, when I mentioned the task groups we are setting up at the beginning of our session, so I mentioned there's 4 task groups, and 2 of those are around, you know, one for pupils and one for parents. So basically, the whole point is young people are going to be involved in that, looking at having some YouTube videos explaining to them what is this ALN code, what's it all about, what does it mean for young people with ALN. And that's our point, that's our way of engaging them and coming up with some sort of co-produced plans in brief.
Thank you. The next question was just the same again, but really around parents, and I suppose just how far along are we with getting that right?
Okay, so on the main SUC website, there's information that's public and available to everybody. So that's available around what's happening to date. And again, that other group I mentioned is like, we've got the pupil one, there'll be one for there's one being set up for parents. So that will, again, explain what does the new code mean, what are the changes, how does it differ from before, and what does it mean for children and their families. So that's, you know, and then we'll come up with some sort of documents again, using all the YouTube, maximising on all of that as part of that.
Oh, hang on, I got hands up, I can't see. Kathy has her hand up.
I'm wondering whether parents are actually fully aware of the fact that the ALN code is coming in September. I mean, I am a parent of 2 ALN children, and I know about it because of this and because of being on governors. But I'm wondering how parents who aren't involved in, you know, in governors and in other things, are they actually aware that the ALN code is coming in and that things could drastically change for their child? Have they been kept informed of this process?
Councillor Evans, I think that's a really good point. I mean, what we've, you know, what's happened is there has been information, as I say, going on the SUC website, but in addition to that, it's something we have been in discussion with schools about having something on their own school's website, because that way parents of children in schools would easily be able to see that and access that, because otherwise it's kind of, you know, although things are on websites, people don't necessarily know they exist or know to look. So I think it's a really good point, and I think that the best way of doing that would be through the schools websites, having clear documentation on there. And similarly, we can do that and look in the early years sector and the post 16 sector as well. It's all part of that communication strand that needs to be done.
Absolutely. Can I suggest that as well as putting things on the school website, you actually text or email parents to let them know on the website, because we don't, unless we're told that there's something new going on the school website.
Sure.
We don't actually look at them all that much.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It's like any communication, isn't it? You don't know what you don't know, really. So it's
great that the information's on the SUC website, but if the parents don't
know
it's not much use, is it?
No, absolutely.
Yeah,
no,
I think
thank you.
I'd make a suggestion on that as well. Around like the early years and sort of going into schools, like I asked earlier about enrolment, you know, just so people are aware that a decision they make about it, you know, could impact them if they do need ALN support, that, you know, they wouldn't be eligible unless they were in an education setting, that sort of thing. So I mean, perhaps just working with our partners there in early years. Okay, John's got his hand up as well.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry, I'm going slightly down the same line. I mean, in that you have to know there's a question to be asked if you're going to ask the question. But I'm really pleased you're using something like YouTube. But if people use YouTube as a toy, you know, they may not see it as something that they can use for very useful information like this. And it's how you get over, you know, use your YouTube for something like this. How you get to those people that don't know yet that there's a question to be asked.
Yes, definitely. I mean, the YouTube, I mean, one of our secondary schools, she's actually made a YouTube a film on YouTube that she's posted for her families, and I think for lots of people, they don't want to sit and read reams and reams of stuff that's, you know, particularly with the code, it's very legalistic, and you can read it and actually, you know, myself and colleagues, in looking at it, we've all interpreted things in different ways. So we've been navigating our way through that and trying to come up with some consistency, which we've gone through with Tracy Peed, which she then takes back to Welsh Government, because that could be really unhelpful if we're all interpreting it in different ways. So we're trying to work on that consistency. So for parents, it's just, and carers and young people themselves, you just want something short, succinct, sticking to the facts, that's easily accessible, and what it really means for them. What difference does it make to them and their lives? And so that's, I think, the key to it, not just having lots of really dry, you know, stuff that people might find difficult to navigate their way through. So that's kind of, that's what we're attempting to do. And obviously, when the final, I keep saying this, final implementation comes out, we'll be able to add all of that in. That's the aim, because we don't want to just wait until everything's finished. Don't want to wait till that guidance is out before we do anything. So we've got to go ahead with the training that I mentioned earlier. We've got planned, and just stick with the facts as we know it at that time, and then anything else in addition that becomes clear over the next few weeks, we can then add in. That's kind of how we're approaching it.
Can we make sure that, I mean, that sounds a brilliant idea. Can we make sure that that head teacher shares what they're doing there? Because sometimes schools don't share what they're doing, sometimes just because they're too modest to. Yeah, that sounds really good.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I've got Colette next for question 3.
On page 79 of the report, you state in 3.13 that in line with the legislative requirements, we aim to give equal opportunities for Welsh and English languages, treating both languages on the basis of equity. Have we got the capacity and resources to do this?
We have to do it because it's the law, is the first thing. So we have to find, you know, our way of maximising on the resources and that we've got to do that. I think that's really important. It's the law, and we have to do it.
Okay.
Dem, I don't know if you want to add anything to that one.
I think it goes back to the answer I gave earlier about we are looking at how we can develop additional provision through the medium of Welsh, and the Gwyn Clwyd site's an obvious candidate for that. It's a struggle. I think it's really difficult. It's something that we continue to flag up in our Welsh Education Strategic Plan in terms of one of the key barriers that we face in terms of attracting people with Welsh language skills, both into specialist roles, peripatetic roles, and into schools. So it is something that we know we will find challenging, and it's something that isn't, you know, it isn't unique to us. And we will have to think about how do we potentially incentivize people to come to work here in a way that we haven't before, and that may carry a cost with it. But again, in the context of there aren't enough people with the skill sets that we need across Wales. So, you know, Councillor Thomas, I think it's a fair question. It's a challenging one, and that we'll continue to work at. But, you know, it's not one I think we'll be well positioned on for some time to come, I'm afraid.
Thank you.
Kathy?
Dermot, on that, are we working with Gwyn Clwyd? I mean, they have, you know, a cohort of Welsh speakers who will eventually go through the school and lead school. Are we working with them to, you know, encourage them to come and work for us, to let them know what opportunities are, you know, and where they are Welsh speakers really badly needed, and kind of, you know, letting them know where they could sort of leave school and get a job straight away, because there's a real need for Welsh speakers in this particular area. Is that something that we're doing?
Yeah, we are having those discussions, and thinking about the early years question earlier, there may be young people who don't want to go into a degree but who might be interested in coming into an apprenticeship. So we are looking at, well, what potential is there for us to try and promote that. And we are talking to Gwyn Clwyd about what other connections we can make with Coleg Gwent and with other providers in the area to try and support opportunities for their learners to stay local and come back to the area. So absolutely, we're keen to maximise that, and particularly bearing in mind with the primary provision coming on site, there'll be lots more opportunities within school to actually look at a wider range of opportunities for those learners to develop skills that may then set them up to go on to further learning and hopefully come back to us. So really keen to look at how we can promote and get the best value out of that campus as it becomes comes online over the next year. So the answer is yes. Obviously, Gwyn Clwys dealing with its own issues at the moment in terms of post-inspection, but that is part of that discussion, and there are some opportunities there that we want to take.
Brilliant, thank you.
Okay, the last couple now then. Has the appropriate training been provided to governing bodies to raise awareness of new requirements and responsibilities?
Okay, so to date, various trainings been offered, which has been led by Tracy Peed, and then there's the training that I was saying, setting up the same, well, versions of the same training to groups of the head teachers, the ALNCOs and the governing body, so they all get the same message, but obviously each kind of training session will be slightly tailored towards each of their roles, if that makes sense. So you know, and a lot of you were saying, Councillor Killett, a lot of you are governors yourselves, so you know, what we're trying to do is make that training accessible at a time of day, because we appreciate when people are working. I think what I'm hearing is the take up of some of the training has been difficult so far, so I'm hoping that done it at a time that is going to be workable for people, and if not, what we'll do is set up another session for people who can't make that. So you know, and also it's about head teachers sort of making sure as part of their governing bodies meetings that there's a kind of an opportunity to have that on the agenda as well, so that you know, any sort of questions as we go along, because questions are going to come up as we go along. As we start in September, there'll be aspects that come up that we're grappling with, so it needs to be ongoing rather than just one off and that's it. So we will look at going forward what else we need to provide. So thank you. Does that answer that question? Councillor Killock, did you want to come in there?
Only to say that if people who are members of governing bodies on this committee, or they can spread it to others, Tracy's training is excellent. It's a really good 2 hours, and I commend it to you.
Fab. Okay, the last one we had then was, how will you ensure appropriate support and resources are allocated to support frontline staff to deal with extra responsibilities that may be required to comply with implementation of the Act?
So in terms of frontline staff, are colleagues thinking that that's within, is it thinking that staff in schools, or is that LA officers? So I mean, if I address both, if it's staff in schools, so we've been working very much with the ALNCOs and the heads to date, but the training we've got planned later this term is for all ALNCOs, not just the for all ALNCOs, not just sort of cluster leads or regional leads. So that's for all of them, with the view that they then you know, the head teacher and the ALNCO will need to sort of cascade that in their schools at their staff meeting or twilight sessions or training sessions that they've got set up. So that's how we're dealing with that. With our own internal staff within the area I manage, we are all focused on the code and have been sort of, you know, working with it all the way through. So those staff are absolutely confident in what they're doing. We're all waiting for this final implementation plan, as I said, because we will need to be putting things in place as soon as we have that. So it's going to be ongoing. And we meet regularly, so as issues and queries arise, we will just need to regroup and grapple with them. So, and as I said, with all the various work streams, groups that we've got set up across the region, similarly, it needs to be it's going to need to be on the agenda continually, just to grapple with any issues or queries or aspects that are arising. So that's the staff in the area I manage. In the wider sector, I've been keeping my social care colleagues in the loop of everything I'm aware of, had regular meetings with them, so work with them in terms of making sure within Torvine that those people are in the loop. There's training, the online training. Again, every time I've been aware of various aspects or changes or information, just trying to make sure everybody's in the department's got that information. So that's within the wider education department and within the social care department. So does that answer the question?
Yeah, thank you. I'm just going to check with members. Is there any more questions or comments you wish to make before we can let the officers go? No. Okay then. Well, I'm going to. You're more than welcome to stay, but if you have had enough, you're free to go now, and we'll put together some recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, members. Thank you.
Thank you for your time today.
Thank you. Okay. Okay, so we're going to look at formulating some recommendations. Does anybody have any that they want to start with?
Yeah, do you want me to just go through some things which I picked up along the way?
That'd be great, yeah.
Obviously, these are my words now, and I'll have to massage the wording, make it look a lot better by the time we come to publish. But to start with, Councillor Killett raised a concern about the gap in relation to performance outcomes we have tried to close among young children has unfortunately now increased or widened due to the pandemic. He did recommend, I think I'm right in saying, Councillor Killett, that the committee may want to look at how this is being addressed in future.
For me, it's crucial to, I mean, so much work went into trying to close the gap over a number of years with additional funding from Welsh Government, but also because people recognise the need. And I really fear that the last 15 months has set us back, even back beyond where we started. Yes, so I would like to, please.
Might be for consideration into inclusion into your work programme, a piece of work going forward. The next one was in relation to a question Michelle raised, and I think Sarah thought it was a good idea to revisit Crownbridge to see how person-centred planning is working and consider how the model could be best used within our other schools. That's another one. Need Welsh Government to invest or consider investing in increasing teaching staff within our Welsh medium sector, and also investing in specialist roles within our media sector schools. Councillor Killett expressed concerns that different partnerships required to work together under the Act to support young people who are over 16 appear not to be very clearly set out. I think the words you used were, it's very murky.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that phraseology, but I mean, I don't know any other way to say it, because it is a dark art to work out how you move from supporting a young person once they pass the age of 16, and I fear that in this instance that dark art may become more so.
I won't go. I think Michelle's got her hands up. Do you want me to just stop there a minute?
I just one of the themes that came through for me throughout the meeting was around capacity.
Yeah.
And there was a constant theme throughout all areas around, they don't, as much as they've planned, and they've done such excellent planning, and you know, they've really gone above and beyond with everything else with COVID as well, but they aren't saying that they are assured they've got enough capacity and resource to do what they need to do. So it's around having them to undertake an assessment as to whether or not they will have enough time, enough capacity once it's gone live, I feel.
I think it may be an idea if we ask the executive member to make some comments to Welsh Government about the fact that this is supposed to be cost neutral. Because I think that's that's one of the major issues, isn't it? It isn't really, I mean, we can see from looking at what we spoke about today, this is nowhere near going to be cost neutral.
I think as well, in terms of the costs are now considerably different because of the pandemic as well. So I think it's a double whammy.
Janet, did you want to come in on that one as well?
Not necessarily on that one, but a comment that we're still awaiting a strategy or a final outcome from Welsh Government. We're almost, a month away from the end of term. Welsh Government want this implemented in September, and we've got no final outcome how to proposal what we're supposed to be doing in guidance. It's really strange how on earth, we're bending over backwards our authority to implement this. They've done the work, and yet it's being held up now because lack of final government guidelines from Welsh Government. That's quite worrying, really, and that's something I thought would have been brought forward at the start of the issue. But that's one of the concerns that I have, and a recommendation that they should have what's the right wording, brought this forward much earlier. Colette, you know my word, my theme, my meaning.
Okay, sorry, just bear with me. Shorthand is my
that's why I can't understand my own writing, Leanne. I do apologise.
Right, bear with me. Where did I get to? Right, Councillor Killett. Councillor Killett raised another point about, I think I've captured this right, but I may not, so apologies. How do we know that the SNAP SLA is satisfactory to parents? I think what you were trying to get at, but I might be wrong, is so we get, feedback on this. How do we know that the SNAP SLA is working for our parents? Has this feedback told us anything specifically on the service being delivered that we could learn from? I'm sure if I captured that correctly.
Yeah, yes, you have. I mean, my concern is very much around how it is monitored by those, or how it is assessed by those who use it. Because, I mean, if you bought a television set, you would be saying yourself as the user, the person watching that television set, whether it was good or not. And it doesn't seem right if in this instance it is not the user who is having a say in how good it is. And I really do have a lot of concerns because of my observations at the 4 appeals tribunals that I've been at. I know it's for a different issue and it might be a different person, all those sorts of things. And therefore, so I'm only probably talking about 2 people from a large staffing there, which may be unfair, but that's my observation, and I am concerned about it for those parents.
I won't go on because I think Councillor Thomas has got her hand raised.
I think my point I raised in the committee about the ongoing sort of concerns about the equality in the Welsh language, how we got the capacity and the resources to deal with that. I would think that we need to raise that again, and perhaps it's something we could put to a future committee or a task and finish group to see how the authority is sort of dealing with these problems. Thanks.
I mean, could I just add into Colette? I mean, perhaps it could even go to something like cross-cutting, because obviously we need Welsh speakers right across, when we're struggling to recruit.
Yeah, how are we going to deal with it? Yeah, thank you.
Cross-cutting, so maybe it's an item which you could suggest to put forward for the visioning.
Yeah.
Glyn?
Well, oddly enough, that was something I was going to suggest, cross-cutting, because I'm very conscious. I after Leanne brought up the Constitution, yesterday. I went back in to have a look at it. And then there's executive, I know this one's a bit tenuous, but nevertheless, it's still there. Executive corporate governance and performance has statutory support for Welsh language. Well, that's part of the ALN code. Then in healthier, they've got adult social care. In children, families and communities, they've got children's rights. And then in prosperous, they've got adult community learning, employability services, and youth engagement and progression. So it strikes me that there are 4 committees there that definitely should have some input into this ALN code issue, or at least should be made much more aware of it than they are. So I think perhaps, yeah, either pass this over to cross-cutting, or we have another seminar on the ALN code, but make it specific that those 4 overview and scrutiny committees should attend, because we feel that they've got an interest in this issue. And the other thing I'd like to suggest is to do with that fact that a lot of children have left Welsh medium education because of the difficulties. Now, I took on board what Dermot said, but I think this is something we need as an education committee to keep an eye on going forward. So basically, can we sort of put that somewhere on our radar so that in September we can be asking questions about how enrollment in those schools has gone, because it could be a big issue financially for those schools going forward. No, I acknowledge it, this isn't an ALN issue, but I think it is an issue for this committee.
I can certainly request the information, Councillor Karen, in September, the pupil numbers on roll, and maybe we can have a comparison to previous years. With regards to the member seminar on the ALN code, we have had 3 previously, 3 member seminars previously. So obviously these seminars for members, they're not compulsory, it's up to the members to attend. So really there's only so much we could do with respect,
Leanne, I think part of the problem may be that if you're sitting on Prosperous and you see an ALN code, seminar come up, you don't think that's actually relevant to your, because it's not, because it's an education thing, when actually it's really relevant, and they're going to have responsibility for overseeing, because it goes up to age 25 and training things are included in Prosperous. I don't think the other members on the other committees have any idea that they should be knowledgeable about the ALN code. I think we need to let them know that this is part of their remit now.
It is difficult, but you went through the right channels yesterday, Councillor Evans, didn't you? Where in actual fact you suggested that specific committee look at this as an issue. And I received an email off Councillor Janet Jones as well, more or less saying the same. So I think when the time comes, when we look at visioning, and when we're asking committee members to plan their work programme for the year, obviously we've got that knowledge now, and we can put that to them. But it is a member-led process. It's up to the committee what they want to select, but we can certainly try our best to let them know.
Janet, did you want to come in?
Oh, just to endorse what Glyn was saying, really, and Kath, because I'm sit on health, and we've had no information about the ALN. I know about it from sitting on education, but it involves health issues as well, and I really think it should have been brought forward for a health committee, and Richard's on health as well, so I'm sure he probably will agree.
Again, I think that's an ideal question, maybe, that you could ask at your visioning session, maybe ask the chief officer, or the officer from social care, or whoever that attends then.
I mean, this came to us from audit, didn't it? Because this has gone on this has come to us via audit because it went on the risk register. So I think Audit sent this to us.
No, this resulted as part of your visioning last time, and I think Dermot brought this to you because it is a key issue. It's a key thing that's coming in this year.
Yeah.
I think it is on the. I think you're right. It is on the risk register. I'm not sure if it's very high, medium, or whatever. I don't know the positioning of it, but yeah, it is an issue. So that's how it's come through your work program.
But I thought it was, I sit on Audit, and I thought it was a recommendation from Audit that this went to this committee. I mean, not recent, this has been a while ago. And I may not be right about that, but nevertheless, I mean, I was thinking, well, yeah, as a member of the Audit Committee, this is where I would have sent it. I wouldn't have thought about sending it to any of the others, so, yeah.
Chair, through you, could I ask Janet if that goes to the health committee, could you make sure that they do talk about 16+ young people, because it really does get very. It's in the health area that I'm most concerned about. When it's at CAMS, Child and Adolescent Mental Health Services, that 16 young people just disappear off the planet somehow. You're muted, Janet.
Sorry, I totally agree with you, because I've got concerns about post-16, and I'm sure Councillor Overton, who's Chair of Health, will ensure that we discuss it thoroughly.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, sorry, I'm frantically scribbling. Right, the next one I think was raised by Councillor Evans. Need to ensure that parents of children with ALN are made aware of the ALN codes coming into force and understand and appreciates what it means. Need to liaise with schools to do this, not just rely on the information being posted or made available on the SEUC website. Is that fair?
Yeah.
And then
I think that's spot on, Leanne. Yes, they need to actually be telling them to go look at the SEUC website, or else how are they going to know?
Yeah, absolutely. Some parents may not have, even have the proper facility to have a look on a website. Councillor Killick, again, I'm not sure if I've positioned this correctly, really. You said something about asking the head teacher. Now, I think this was to do with sharing work around the awareness.
That was just, it was a piece of good practice, and I think pieces of good practice sometimes get lost in the. It wasn't really for this committee. It was just ask, for her if she would, if she would make sure that good practice gets passed on, because sometimes they don't do that. Very often they don't do that. And sometimes because it's just that they're too modest or whatever. It's not a threat of badness or anything.
I think that's probably an overriding recommendation, isn't it? That as this comes in now, and schools and places are doing different things, if there is good practice somewhere, we need to be highlighting it and sharing that information with everyone else.
Yeah.
And I think that's just a general recommendation for most things, really, but especially with something new coming in like this.
Okay. And that's all I had. Thank you, Chair. I don't know if any members want to add additional recommendations to that.
Yeah, did anyone have anything else? I don't think so.
I was a little bit concerned that for early years, which encompasses every childminder, every private, every LA nursery in the whole borough, they have one person. They have one person who is coordinating all those children. Now, every school has an ALNCO, and then they have one person for the entire early years. I don't know whether that's going to be enough capacity, and I don't know what they're going to do with Maithrin if that person is not a Welsh speaker. And so I think I think schools are actually of the least concern in this, because they've all got their ALNCOs, they've got all the support in place, they've had all the training, they've got everything, they've got all teams of people ready, and then early years and post-16, there's nothing. And I really think that's where all the focus now needs to be put, is on making sure that early years and post 16 have the same level of support as schools do. Because if they don't have the level of support at early years, by the time they get to school age, there's going to be a massive problem, and schools are going to have more issues to deal with because these children didn't have that level of support during their early years.
Yeah, but the other side of that coin is there's only one DECLO for the whole of the health authority, which strikes me as nuts as well.
Is there any more?
Sorry, Leanne, I just realised I've just given you an essay to write down at speed, haven't I?
Honestly, that's fine. As I said, shorthand isn't my forte, so apologies. Okay, thank you, Chair.
Okay, I think then if that's it, I think that is the end of the meeting.
Chair, before we finish, our next meeting is scheduled for the 6th of October. And I'm rather concerned that as a schools committee, we haven't had a report really on the 3 schools we have causing concern. I should have raised it actually in the report when Dermot was there. I wonder if we could, if we all agree, that we could request the chair to look at a way of perhaps a mechanism to report, that we can have a report on these schools, whether we have a special meeting, whether we have the executive member along to give us his views on things, what's going on, or whether we have a members' seminar. But I really don't think we can go until October without this committee being aware of the situations of 3 schools causing concern. I think we've got a duty to scrutinise, and even with the members' seminar, we can always scrutinise. So I think it is urgent, and I think we should ask the chair to look at the most appropriate way for us to receive an update on the situation.
Chair, I fully agree with Councillor Thomas. I think we should have a special meeting called and have Dermot and Richard in to give us a full report on the progress of the schools causing concern. And I do think it's an urgent matter. I completely agree. It can't be left until October. We need to know what's going on in these schools before the end of term.
Yeah, definitely.
Can I just come in there, Chair? I'll liaise with Councillor Seaborn when she returns, but obviously this is a sort of different situation now. The meeting for October is for the Education Overview and Scrutiny Committee. Now they're provisional dates that have been booked in at the moment. So obviously everything is dependent now on your visioning session in July, i.e. how many items the committee pick, and when decisions are needing to be made by Cabinet. So, for example, if a key issue is identified, I don't know, let's talk about what we've just done, ALN. So a decision needs to be made by Cabinet in November. So yeah, it would be timely for you to look at October. But as I said yesterday, Councillor Thomas, it's not set in stone, the diary. We can fit meetings in as and when. In relation to the members, you know, being kept informed about, you know, the schools causing concern and an update on the 3 schools. I spoke to Dermot yesterday, and I think they're happy to come along. Been to the school sub, but I appreciate members' concerns yesterday that school sub members are just a collective of the Education Committee, and they're going to come along to the Education Committee to inform the members what's going on. But obviously I'll work with the chair on a date and trying to pull all that together.
Yeah, can I say, Chair, I think it is urgent, and we're going into a new term now in September, and it will mean that we haven't had a full report for the whole of the last sort of scrutiny cycle on these schools. We might have had reports, written reports, but we haven't actually had a chance to question the members responsible.
Okay, Well, obviously, as an only interim chair, I'm happy for Rose to deal with that.
Thank you.
And pass it on to her. But okay then, thank you very much, everybody, and I will see you soon.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Goodbye,
Bye.
everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Have a great
Bye.
afternoon.
Good meeting. Bye.